If Democrats win the House, they could elevate the current Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries, to be the Speaker of the House. And he joins me tomorrow in what we think is a newsworthy interview to talk about those midterms, politics, even his New York Knicks. So set your calendar, put it in your phone, get ready. Hakeem Jeffries on the beat tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern. The weeknight starts now.
Good evening and welcome to the weeknight. I'm Alicia Menendez with Simone Sanders Townsend and Michael Steele. Breaking tonight, it's another big night of primary races all around the country, and Donald Trump and his MAGA allies are actively trying to undermine our elections, all part of their plan to rig the narrative ahead of the midterms.
Also ahead, a top House Democrat is now questioning the president's health, saying the White House needs to come clean about why Trump, quote, keeps going to the hospital and why they keep giving him cognitive tests. It's crazy.
That's a good question. And later, House Oversight Chairman James Comer says he's not going to bring in Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche to speak with the committee. Congressman James Walkinshaw will be at the table to react to that bombshell and some more. Let's start, folks, with some breaking news. Polls just closed in South Carolina and one of 4 states holding primaries tonight. Voting is still underway in Maine, North Dakota, and Nevada. Tonight, MS Now's Ali Velshi will break down key races as results come in. And while voters head to the ballot box, Donald Trump is setting the stage to undermine confidence in the outcome of those elections. And unlike his 2020 lies, these lies are far more dangerous. Trump now has the architecture of the federal government working for him. In 2020, he had the fraud narrative, but not the machinery. He had the words, but not the tools to make the words come alive. Now the institutions that pushed back last time have been systematically rebuilt around Trump's wishes. And belief in stolen elections is now widespread in the GOP, and I would say in parts of the country. It's coming from Congress and from governors. As MS Now's Zach Stanton explains, this is no longer a fringe position. It's the price of admission. Also breaking tonight, Trump just posted the bill that Bill Pulte will take over as acting director of national intelligence, replacing Tulsi Gabbard on June 19th, just 10 days from now, despite bipartisan opposition to the man with no national security experience. Trump has previously suggested that Pulte will use that office to look into, quote, rigged elections. I had to pause there.
Let's talk about what is under the purview of the Director of National Intelligence. You're talking about 18 intelligence community elements. That includes the CIA, that includes the FBI. And Simone, as you know well, that means they're in control of a number of elements, including budgets. So, yeah, he may only be in there for 210 days, given that they have no interest in a Senate confirmation. He can still do a lot of damage in 210 days. Puts him well after midterms.
I just checked. There are 147 days until Election Day, okay? 21 weeks, just under 5 months after Labor Day. There will only be about 8 weeks left in campaigning. And Bill Pulte can serve for 210, which means not only he can serve up until and through Election Day, well after. I just take y'all back. Fulton County. Fulton County. The previous Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was there when the government went and seized ballots from Fulton County from the 2020 election. Why was Tulsi Gabbard there? Has anyone been able to find the answer to these questions, Michael Steele? What sense did it make? Was it really about 2020 or was it about 2026? Could it be about 2028? These are all the questions I have.
So, Simone, no one's asking those questions that you are aptly asking, and certainly no one's going to ask those questions in this administration because, as we noted coming into this conversation, the infrastructure has now been built. What struck me about this, in addition to what both you and Alicia just said, is they chose Juneteenth. They chose Juneteenth to make this official. Now,
why do you think they did that?
So just, folks, understand what Juneteenth is and what it means to many, many African Americans around the country. It is the final bit of celebration, right? The final celebration of freedom, that word that finally got out that y'all free. And when you consider what this administration with its Supreme Court has done, to voting rights and civil rights. I just found, I mean, I know some of these people, it just struck me as like, of all the days of the week, you picked Juneteenth for this. So, look, this is a part of their packaging. This is part of built now into the infrastructure. I think what we're going to see play out is what we've been talking about at this table for some time, and that is this is the run-up to take control of the 26 elections that lays down the foundation for how they do the bigger game in 28.
Can I just make one other point about Juneteenth? Juneteenth is the day that the last people in Galveston, Texas, found out that slavery was over and they were free. Well after slavery had ended, okay, 3 years after, which means the government, the people in charge, were not telling the folks in Texas what was going on. There are many places, our history is unbroken continuity. It is not lost on me that localities and municipalities have told lies and stories or not told the full truth in order to maintain power. As Michael said in the lead-in, now this particular government is full of people who are willing to do Donald Trump's bidding. These folks are not on the outside this time. They're on the inside and they're in charge. If you're scared, if you feel like I'm trying to make it scary, I am.
Well, you should be scared, and there's a lot of reason to be scared, but we've got some people to unscare us. Let's bring in MS Now legal analyst Mary McCord. She served as Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Justice Department's National Security Division, and she's the co-host of MS Now's Main Justice podcast. Also with us, we're very happy to welcome Scott MacFarlane, Chief Washington Correspondent at Midas Touch.
Do you think you could have worked for Bill Pulte, Mary McCord?
Oh, I do not.
That's one way to start off the conversation.
I mean, you know, knowing what I know now, absolutely not. Knowing what I would have known as soon as he was appointed, I think absolutely not as well. I mean, this is a person who's been, carrying on the lies that Donald Trump has been propounding at least since 2020. But his time in his position at the Federal Housing Finance Administration has shown that he is willing to do whatever it takes to try to serve up and pressure serve up to the president for the president to pressure the Department of Justice to go after political enemies. I mean, he's the one who, at least according to reporting, came up with the evidence, and I put scare quotes around this, to justify targeting Letitia James and James Comey, well, maybe not James Comey, Adam Schiff, Lisa Cook, Jerome Powell, and to have him at as the DNI as we were going into the midterms with access to intelligence that the rest of us don't have access to, and access to say whatever he wants to say about whatever that intelligence might show about the election, that's a very dangerous thing.
This is a really important point, because part of what Bill Pulte did while he was still head of the housing agency is that he took information from pieces of information from various applications, and then he just offered up a lie. You know, he said, I think an investigation should happen here because this looks like mortgage fraud. This is mortgage fraud. The Department of Justice should investigate. This, when you get intelligence information, the DNI, we talk about the Presidential Daily Brief often. The Presidential Daily Brief, folks, the Director of National Intelligence is, correct me if I'm wrong, Mary, but they are like they're the arbiter of what goes into that brief for the president and the vice president. These are the nation's most sensitive secrets, the most important information. And I'm concerned that somebody like Bill Pulte now has access to that information, given that from the New York Times yesterday, this is the headline, Trump previews fall strategy with baseless claims of California voter fraud. The president is telling us with a bullhorn what he plans to do, and now he's putting his soldiers in place that will act on his orders.
Not only did Bill Pulte try to mechanize information to lead to a prosecution of Trump's critics, Adam Schiff and Letitia James, he was terrible at it. The grand jurors rejected the cases, saying this is bogus. Grand jurors don't do that frequently. I went searching high and low, far and wide to find surrogates championing Bill Pulte on Capitol Hill. I am still looking to find one. There's nobody out there saying this is a really good idea. I totally endorse the president's pick, including his most loyal members of the MAGA faithful on Capitol Hill. But yeah, it's clear the subtext here. The elections are coming. This really mechanizes things ahead of November 3rd.
You know, that last piece says a lot about not just the politics here, but just the nasty nature of this, just the sort of insidious effort to undermine our electoral process. I've been saying at every chance I can as we've been dealing with these primary elections, certainly what we see going on in California right now, that our elections are some of the safest in the world. When you have 50 independent elections across the country, not that, yeah, we use the national title and they put up a board of the country up there, but those are 50 individual elections.
Even more than that, because
Thank you, because then you get down to the county. That's exactly where I want to go. You get down to the county level, and then you get down to the city level, right? So first, as just a bold point up front, if all these Republicans are going to be behind this effort this November, that's their name on the ballot. So now their elections are suspects. Maybe you, sir, did not win that seat in that district. So we have to look at it again. I don't think they want to do that. I don't think the Republicans want to do that across the board because in a lot of my experience with recounts, they don't necessarily always work out the way you like them to. So there's that. But from your perspective, looking at this, looking at the pressure on California, the threat now, or in fact, the action to send federal officials there to investigate, how do you see the combination? You spoke about the DNI piece, but then the Justice Department piece as sort of the lead enforcer on this, the backup. How would that work, and what should American people be looking for as this thing starts to unfold?
So, while it is at the state and local level that election administration takes place, the federal prosecutors do have authority to investigate federal crimes, including election crimes. And interestingly...
So if anyone can allege a crime?
Well, I mean, it needs to be based on evidence, but look at the way things have been going.
Scott just chuckled on that point.
I can talk to you about, I can talk to you, as Nicole Wallace likes to say, I can tell you about Earth 1, and then I can tell you about Earth 2, right? And on Earth 1, when I was at the Department of Justice, you didn't even start an investigation without some substantial evidence. And then I will say, there were strict rules about not doing any kind of overt things that might interfere with the election. You would save, even if there was evidence of some sort of fraudulent activity, you might save it till afterwards, because if it doesn't pan out, you have just inserted yourself into the election, right? So most things were about punish later,
before,
right? Because most things, unless it's massive, are not going to change the result. I mean, because normally what we're talking about is a handful of people who, voted when they didn't have actually the authority to vote. Sometimes that's been people who've been convicted of crimes who haven't had their civil rights restored. Sometimes that's been somebody maybe who is not a citizen, but it has maybe the right to vote in state and local elections, which happens
But
sometimes,
not
and not federal, right? So there are different reasons for this that wouldn't change the result. But I'm concerned about the fact that it seems like all of the rules, all of the norms that otherwise have guided the Department of Justice have been thrown out the window. So I don't see why that norm wouldn't also be thrown out the window.
Aided and abetted by Republicans in Congress. I mean, Speaker Mike Johnson was asked about evidence of fraud, and this is what he came up with as an answer, Scott.
I'm not saying it's rigged. I'm saying it stinks to high heaven, and everybody knows that. Some of these efforts are so diabolical and so far upstream it is impossible to prove. But I think everybody knows instinctively something is wrong here, and that's a concern. We need people to believe in the integrity of our election system. It is critical to maintain a constitutional republic.
Here's the thing. If the argument is there is a way for us to revise our elections that allows more people to participate and allows us to return results in a timely manner, that's a separate conversation from the one that they are having, which is they are not actually interested in reforms that make the process more democratic, that allow more people to participate. They are actively trying to keep people out. They are actively trying to sow doubt. And it is telling to me that they haven't even come up with fake evidence. Now we're just at the point where they're saying, well, they're vibes.
Mary, Michael, Alicia, Simone, can we have a family conversation?
We're here. Please, let me take a sip. Hold on.
Thank you. You're doing the right thing. I'm not concerned about November 3rd. I'm concerned about November 4th, 5th, and 6th.
That's right.
If you hear all the consternation about California right now, all these conspiracy theories, all these lies about California, what do you think is going to happen when we're waiting for California to determine who controls the U.S. House? And if I take it back, let's go way back, 8 years. all the way back. In 2018, we weren't sure when the evening concluded if Trump had lost a little or had gotten routed in the midterms because we didn't know where California was. It became clear over days Trump got killed in the midterms in 2018 because of California. And I can see us being on a knife's edge November 4th, 5th, and 6th, and them utilizing all of this to try to sow down.
You know, I think back to the election in 2020. I worked on the Biden campaign, and I remember the night of election night that Donald Trump went from the White House, in the People's House, down to a podium and claimed victory, even though he had not won. We spent the rest of that week detailing to the American people via the press in very detailed ways of our numbers, showing our methodology about how it is, what the numbers really are, and why it is we believe that when the numbers pan out, we will win this election. And by Saturday, it was very clear that Joe Biden was, in fact, the winner of that race and the next president of the United States. My concern about the days after these midterm elections is that was easy to do because we were one campaign. One presidential campaign, that was the campaign that was being questioned, centralized. We can clearly go in front and lay out what our numbers are. To the point that Michael and Mary were making, our election system is not one federal system. There are many different systems. Some of these campaigns, like some of these folks do not have the resources or the capacity to go out there and do what we did, but that is what is going to be necessary because they're going to lie. And Mike Johnson, maybe he was one of the chief cheerleaders of the insurrection. He was one of the people that said the 2020 election was stolen. And now he is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. If you don't think they're going to plan and pull any tricks, people would be fooling themselves. So I think we're having this conversation now, and we'll continue to have it so that people can be ready. They have to be ready. They have to wrap their minds around what is actually a potential for this election, because January 6th was all about the big lie. The big lie was that the election was stolen, and that moved those people who to go to the Capitol. Many of them in court said, I thought the president was telling the truth. Now you got Ro Khanna saying one of his friends believes Spencer Pratt was robbed of the election, and he canceled his voter registration in California today. One of the friends of a sitting congressman, okay? So people got to get really serious. This is not just some fodder on the internet. I caught the Michael Steele bug. I had something to say. All right, Mary McCord, Scott McFarland, thank y'all both for kicking us off on this family conversation.
Of course.
In just a moment, the president's apparent public nap at the NBA Finals has one Democrat questioning Trump's fitness and what the White House is hiding. And later, Republicans reject the idea of forcing Trump's pick for Attorney General to testify about the Epstein files. Congressman James Walkinshaw of the Oversight Committee is here to react. You are watching The Weeknight.
Some are calling it the Trump curse. The New York Knicks had not lost in 46 days, a 13-game winning streak, until Donald Trump showed up to Game 3 of the NBA Finals and ruined everything. The president tried to make himself the center of attention on basketball's biggest stage and was, quote, thunderously booed by Knicks fans as a result. All eyes were on Trump last night, and when those eyes saw him appear to nod off in his luxury box, many, including Congressman Ted Lieu, well, they were concerned.
The President of the United States is not well. We can see it with our own eyes. He has tremendous difficulty staying awake on the job. Donald Trump has repeatedly fallen asleep at multiple cabinet meetings, at multiple White House events, at a Memorial Day ceremony, and most recently at a very loud and raucous New York Knicks San Antonio Spurs game last night.
Joining us now is Eugene Daniels, MS Now senior Washington correspondent, co-host of The Weekend, and co-host of the podcast Clock It with Simone.
Ted Lieu sounds like me because I have been saying the president is unwell to be very... Sorry, guys, I just had to nod off for a second. This is insane. It is crazy. It is a national security concern. Like, let's put aside the fact that he was at a very loud game. If the president is falling asleep like this in places and spaces in front of cameras where we can see it, what is happening that we can't see? What are the people at the White House hiding? What are they covering up? They want us to be talking about the Knicks and how they booed the president. The people in the arena booed the president. And I also am wondering why Steve Witkoff was there and not negotiating the end to the war with Iran when apparently the war is not over more than 100 days in. But this is crazy. It is insane, and if you were at the White House, would you be asking these questions? What, Mr. President, why are you so tired?
Well, because the question is, we know why he's so tired. He
Well,
doesn't
do
sleep.
we? We don't know.
Well, part of it is like he doesn't sleep. The man called.
Neither does Michael Steele, and he doesn't take a nap, and I've never
Michael
seen
Steele is
him.
many years younger
Very
than
much so,
Donald
but I'm
Trump.
just saying, he doesn't nap, and he doesn't drink coffee, really.
I don't know what to say. We're going to skip that.
Okay.
But I think the thing that's really important is this is one of those things that this White House could sell, right? They could say, you know, sometimes the president falls asleep at things, but that's because he's calling reporters at night. That's because he's on the phone all the time. But instead, what they want to sell, they could say that. They're not saying anything now. So that's part of the issue. When you ask them questions about it, they act like we're crazy, like we're not watching it. And there was a time a few weeks ago where they took screenshots of reporters, Caitlin Collins, one of them, to CNN, taking a picture of her where it actually was blinking and said, oh, she's falling asleep. They did the same thing with Joy Behar of The View. Took a screenshot when she was on the show, said, oh, she's falling asleep. Because for them, it is a thing to make fun of and joke about. But Simone, you're right. It is much more serious.
But the difference between taking a screenshot of someone in the middle of a clip where you catch it just right in there, it's not the same as...
No, he was slumped in the Oval Office.
It's not the same of all this activity going on around you and having to watch the process of going to sleep, where your eyes get heavy and you try to stay awake and someone says something, you do that, you know? That's that. The Wall Street Journal, I think, kind of puts a point on where all of this sort of goes down the bowl in. The celebratory air that Trump brought to the party has dissipated ever since his cultural cachet hit his zenith around his second inauguration. Trump's setbacks on the culture front come amid a dip in his approval ratings and growing concerns over his handling of the economy. Several high-profile podcasting allies have turned on Trump over the war in Iran and his administration's handling of the Epstein files, among other issues. So the problem of that imagery is it makes it hard to sustain and hold in place all the people that brought you to the dance and kept you on the dance floor. And now they see you falling asleep in the middle of the dance when they still have stuff they want to get done, Epstein files, when they still have, you know, projects and other things that they think should be happening, they get concerned, they pull away. How does that play? What have you been hearing about that tension that the Wall Street Journal kind of puts into this, you know, fading fun? But I think it runs a little bit deeper than that in that universe, because the one thing Donald Trump loves more than anything else, well, two things. One is the lackey, the person who's going to lick the boot and say whatever needs to be said at the right moment. But the other person is the person who actually is going to come to the table and do some of the things that he needs to be done out in the culture. And that piece of it seems to be also a problem.
I mean, what the Wall Street Journal is saying is that Donald Trump has a lack of focus. Right.
He's not that's what it breaks down to.
He's not focusing on the things or the people that brought him to the dance.
Right.
And when you talk to some of his allies, they will say the same thing. Susie Wiles, the White House chief of staff, has been telling staff, you guys focus on the talking points. We're going to talk about affordability and the midterms, and President Trump is going to be President Trump. And I think, I've never worked in the White House, Simone, you have, but that seems like a really confusing way to run an operation. Because even if all of the folks
talk about
Trump,
this, and he's going to talk about that.
I mean, that's not running the operation.
Donald Trump on Friday got a really good jobs number, right? Like there was surprising jobs. Has anybody heard him talk about it other than one tweet that we've seen?
Right. I mean,
he had a rally on Friday, almost no mention of it.
I mean, that to me is we have to acknowledge that he's falling asleep while the economy is off the rails, right? And I think if sort of all indicators were positive across the board, if we were not at war, a war of choice, this might be less alarming, but it is alarming in the context of where we find our economy and our positioning.
I think that I really, and people are going to be like, why are you yelling? I used to work in the White House, okay? I have worked for presidents, I've worked for a vice president, I've worked for governors, I've elected state representatives, I've elected mayors. To be very clear, the President of the United States is, in fact, one of the most powerful people, if not the most powerful person in the world. They, and they alone, make the decisions if we go to war or if the button is pushed or if it's not. They make the decision if our young men and women and our service members are put into harm's way. It is the President of the United States whose words can tank an economy. And this president, the fact that he is sleeping regularly in public, in front of cameras, in the middle of press conferences, in the middle of games, is a national security concern. So if the president is asleep here in places that we can see with our own eyes, okay, or appears to be asleep, right? I guess I wasn't there. I don't know if he was asleep. Appears to be asleep. Then what else is happening in the White House?
So is
he napping? Like, who is in charge?
So to that point, I thought it was notable that at this big UFC thing they're doing at the White House, we have just learned that's going to be closed to reporters unless the UFC lets them in. Given how highly choreographed this has been, given that they have told service members they're allowed to come, but only if they pay their own way, meet a certain way in, because clearly the president wants a very specific aesthetic at this event, why then wouldn't you want a fair and free press there to cover its splendor?
Because this is an organization at the White House, the folks that operate in the White House, that don't want that, right? In theory, Donald Trump does want people to see what he's doing, but he knows that people will, right? He knows that the pool will be there, so the White House press pool will be there.
Will they be there?
They will be there, according to the White House. We will see if that actually happens, but all of the other reporters won't be there, and that means if anything else happens, right, on that day, if anything else happens around the country, if something happens at the White House, then the only reporters that will see it will be the pool. And that is also an issue of national security and concern. And I think the thing for this White House with Donald Trump is everything's choreographed because he wants it to look a certain way, not because he wants the American people to see everything. And I think that is a difference between this White House and many others, and that includes him possibly falling asleep at the White House, whether he's at games or not. And I think it's a really interesting metaphor for the way that he's operating and the lack of focus that even his allies to this day will tell me and every other reporter that he does not have when it comes to the things that might win them the midterms. What's the bill that they're running on? Still the first bill that they really passed, which is the great big beautiful bill last year. They have nothing else to run on. And that is what, when I talk to Republicans in Congress, that is their biggest concern.
Get some no-dos.
Eugene Daniels, thank you so much for being with us at the table. You can catch Eugene's show The Weekend every Saturday and Sunday, 7 a.m. Eastern, right here on MS Now. Stay with us. We have some breaking Epstein Files news to cover. Oversight Democrat James Walkinshaw joins us here on set after just finishing an interview with one of Jeffrey Epstein's former assistants, who was mentioned more than 100,000 times in those files, right here on The Weeknight.
Today, before the House Oversight Committee interviewed Jeffrey Epstein's former assistant, Leslie Groff, Chairman James Comer, he balked at the idea of forcing Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche to testify before the panel.
Todd Blanche came to speak to us for a briefing, and the Democrats got up and tiptoed out and ran to the press, clutching their pearls in outrage. What a wasted opportunity. We asked Blanche questions for 2 hours, Blanche and Bondi. So, it's never enough for Garcia.
Back in March, Blanche and then Attorney General Pam Bondi appeared before the committee for a very contentious interview that was not transcribed. Democrats walked out of that interview complaining that neither official was under oath and demanding they appear for an actual hearing. Those are the facts. Joining us at the table is Democratic Congressman James Walkinshaw of Virginia. He is a member of the House Oversight Committee, and he was in today's interview with Leslie Groff.
And we're going to get to that interview in a second, but I want to give you a chance to respond to Chairman Comer's assertion there that you don't need another chance to talk to the potentially Attorney General of the United States.
Chairman Comer must have been asleep during the interview we did with Pam Bondi, because time after time after time, when Democrats asked her questions and when Republicans asked her questions, her answer was, you should ask Todd Blanche. He heard that. He sat right there and heard that. And for him to say we don't need to question Todd Blanche about his role running the flawed release of the Epstein files, I think just reveals his active participation in this ongoing cover-up.
Well, I think that question about what do you do with someone like Blanche will get resolved next year. When the power balance in the country, not the country, in the Congress changes and gives Democrats the chance to use the authority they have to actually pull these folks in. Because you're right. I mean, she said, you got to talk to the guy. Well, let's talk to him. And for Chairman Comer to come out and say that, Democrats are just clutching their pearls over this, it's a great little line, and I'm sure it'll play back in his district. But this is a serious matter. This is very serious, and the fact that even still they stonewall and they obfuscate and they make it harder to get to the truth of what happened to these women drives a lot of folks crazy, and it just makes it all kind of nuts. But I want to talk about Leslie Groff real quick because of all the people, your assistant of 18 years knows a lot, done a lot, made a lot of phone calls, put through a lot of messages, returned a lot of phone calls. So how did it go today when you talked to Ms. Groff? What did she help us understand about the relationship between the two of them and Epstein's relationship with some key principals, including Donald Trump?
Leslie Groff was his assistant for 18 years before his 2008 guilty plea for the sex charge and after. And she maintained today that over those 18 years, while we know Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were engaged in crime after crime after crime, that she knew nothing and never once even suspected that perhaps he was abusing women and girls. She scheduled massage after massage after massage, meeting after meeting after meeting with young women, some of whom we know, based on the files, would email to her when they were scheduling these meetings and talk about their orchestra class.
We have one of those emails, Congressman. Can I read it for folks? This email is dated January 27th, 2014. Leslie Groff, hello. Hope you are having a nice weekend. Jeffrey will be in town Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday and would like to see you. Might you have some time? Please let me know, Leslie. The name is redacted here, but it says Tuesday, I'm at school till 10 p.m. We have orchestra rehearsal for the concert on Friday.
Yeah. Now, look, could an adult have school in an orchestra concert? Perhaps. But it might raise some suspicions if you know that your boss pled guilty to soliciting prostitution from an underage girl. Leslie Groff maintained today that she never once even had a suspicion that perhaps he was abusing women and girls. I find it unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable, not remotely credible.
Now, just do a quick follow-up on that, on this email that Simone just read. The individual that she is emailing to, was this a high school student? Do we know who this person was? Any sense of who this person would have orchestra rehearsal?
We don't know. This is one of the victims or survivors whose name was redacted from the file.
So you have not even seen that?
I have not. Perhaps some of my colleagues have gone and looked at that file to see precisely who that is, yeah.
Do you believe Leslie Groff today?
No.
What, did members in that interview press her on the assertion that she didn't know anything?
Many times. And she maintained that, A, she believed Jeffrey Epstein's story about the 2008 guilty plea. That
and what was his story?
His story was he was blackmailed. He made a mistake. He didn't know that the girl was underage, and he was blackmailed, and he was going to be 100% sure never to do anything like that again. She believed that story, continued working for him, and spent a decade after that, more than a decade, arranging meeting after meeting after meeting and massage after massage after massage, and facilitating travel for the young women, facilitating payments for the young women. She seemed to claimed she believed that they were just assistants. She described how their role was sometimes to get Jeffrey Epstein a cheeseburger or a cup of coffee. She seemed to think it was nothing more than that. I don't buy it. I think it's a ridiculous assertion. There's no way she could have spent that much time with
Office conversation alone would tell you that.
It's crazy.
impossible.
I want to go back to Todd Blanche because the reason that you are having to piece together all of these interviews and pieces of information is because there is this black void at the Department of Justice. Given that Comer is saying there's no reason to bring Blanche in and sit with House Oversight Committee, Blanche is still going to need to go through a confirmation hearing through the U.S. Senate. The soonest that could likely be is mid-July. Does this then just become the centerpiece of when Democrats ask him about?
It certainly should be a driving force. Obviously, there's other things to be concerned about with Todd Blanche. But one thing that is true about this Epstein saga is that in the country, get outside of Washington, this is an issue that unites Democrats, independents, and Republicans. So those Republican primary voters that Senate Republicans need, they want to see these files released. They want to see the illegal redactions revealed. They want justice and transparency and accountability for the survivors. The only people standing in their way are Todd Blanche, James Comer, and Republicans in Washington.
Can I? I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'm clearing my throat because I'm literally caught up. But, you know, I'm just very interested in Bill Gates's testimony on June 10th and what people might expect to hear from him. I mean, according to the New York Times, he apparently has hired the ex-oversight chief to advise on the Epstein testimony. This is the gentleman who, up until December, was literally the lead investigator on the House Oversight Committee, and now apparently he's advising Bill Gates.
I think it's a bad move by Bill Gates to hire this individual, bad move for this individual to take that role. It further diminishes the credibility around this investigation. And the public is correctly, understandably, skeptical that this is a serious effort, that we're working and Republicans are working to uncover the truth. And when you have somebody who's conducting the investigation on Monday and then getting paid by someone who's being investigated on Friday, it further reduces the credibility of the Republicans and their role in this investigation. I think that's bad for the Congress, bad for the country, bad for our investigation. It was a bad decision all around.
I am told. Thank you, Congressman James Walkinshaw. We appreciate your time. We have some breaking news to get to. We are just getting this in the California governor's race. The Associated Press now projects that Republican Steve Hilton will advance to the general election and face off against Democrat Javier Becerra. For the last week, Republicans have claimed without any evidence that California's elections are rigged. It's unclear if those calls will continue now that a Republican has advanced in one of the races.
Maybe that was rigged.
Maybe. Well, we are going to talk more about this with Ali Velshi on the other side of a very short break. Stay with us.
Polls are going to be closing in Maine in a moment, but we're going to break down the breaking news on the California governor's race right now with our friend Ali Velshi. Ali, what's the upside here? What's happening?
Well, the breaking news that Steve Hilton will advance. Steve Hilton and Javier Becerra, it was election night that we knew Becerra was going ahead. Steve Hilton will now advance to face him off in the election. Tom Steyer effectively out of the race at this point. Here's how we came to this conclusion. 88% of the vote is in now across California, but we got vote in from three major centers. Los Angeles is almost done now, 98% of the vote. Tom Steyer coming in second there. Not much vote to come in left in L.A. Sacramento is now at 93%. Tom Steyer is running third there, but that gave us a lot more information because Steve Hilton coming in second there. And Fresno is the third big county that we got tonight. Only 82% of the vote in there, so still a lot more to come in. But based on Tom Steyer's performance at this point in the counties that have come in and the remaining vote that's left, he's not going to be able to catch up to Steve Hilton. So we can now say that Javier Becerra, the former Attorney General, and Steve Hilton are going to advance to the primary in California. As you said, Michael, we are expecting votes in from Maine. We've got some votes in from South Carolina already. There's actually a number of primaries. Most eyes tonight are on Maine and Graham Plattner, and not just sort of how folks in Maine are voting, but how that's going to affect the national conversation and the race to the Senate. So we'll be we'll come back and talk about that when next we talk.
All right, Ali Velshi at the big board giving us the latest on California with Maine to come. Thank you, Ali. Appreciate it.
A pleasure.
Yeah, Maine, California. Well, California is interesting because I think, just real quick on that, all the noise that Republicans right out of the gate, oh, it's rigged, taking their cue from the man in the Oval Office. So now what do you say, Republicans? Republican is in the number 2 slot. It's going to be, you know, on the ballot box.
They always find a way.
You know, was that rigged? I think it was rigged. I think we need to look at that election because, you know, at one point Steyer was in the lead. Imagine that. After all that time, when was this election again?
It was last Tuesday.
Last Tuesday. And so it took all that time and all that. So it was rigged in one race, but not in the other. This is how stupid it is, people.
The argument falls apart. I mean, Michael is making a very good point. The argument falls apart. We will see. It was Steve Hilton, actually, today that was supposed to hold a press conference in California to talk about the quote-unquote slow balloting process in California. I'm using air quotes for the people listening. And now he's advancing. We'll see what he has to say about this tonight.
Right.
I will just say on Maine, Alicia, what I'm watching for is the people of Maine are going to get to say about who the Democratic nominee is. And lots of consternation last week about how, oh, Democrats should do this, do that. The Maine voters are going to get to say who they want to go up against Susan Collins. And I'll be waiting to see what their verdict is.
And what do you think that's going to tell you?
I think it'll tell me that they are thinking about winning. They're thinking about power. And frankly, people always, you know, our Republican friends, led by Michael Steele in the past, they have been very good at thinking about power. The entire Republican Party has had a power project for longer than I've been alive. Democratic institutions and leaders oftentimes have put the morals and the ethics ahead of the want for power. In this situation, there are many people that have said...
That's clear.
Well...
They didn't do that this time.
And there are people that have said, well, look, we don't like what we're hearing, but we want to win. And it's an interesting conversation to have.
I'm curious to see what Maine voters decide to do.
All right. Coming up next on All In, Chris brings you primary election updates as polls close in Maine. That's at 8 o'clock Eastern right here on MS Now. Folks, we'll be right back.
That does it for the weeknight. We'll see you back here tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern. Oversight Democrat Stephen Lynch will be here on the same day Bill Gates testifies on the committee's Epstein investigation. And a reminder, on Monday, June 15th, you can catch the premiere of my new show, On the Line. That's going to air weekdays at 12 Eastern. And here on the weeknight, Michael and Simone are going to join Luke Russer to the table. That all starts Monday, June 15th. Thank you for watching. All In with Chris Hayes starts right now.
Tonight on All In.
I do kind of believe that people do get drunk, stupid tattoos.
Maine voters make their voices heard.
All of a sudden, we got a guy who can unseat Susan Collins for the first time in forever, and now we're talking about moral standards. Come on.
Tonight, all the election results that are fit to report with the polls now closed in Maine and Ali Velshi at the big board. Then,
it's happening right now in California. Right now, it's look at what's happening in California.
To that?
Republicans revive the animating lie of the January 6th insurrection.
Some of these efforts are so diabolical and so far upstream it is impossible to prove.
Plus, new U.S. strikes on Iran 101 days after Trump declared war, and new evidence that the manhood argument isn't working in Texas.
If you were making a list of 1,000 adjectives to describe this guy, masculine would not be one of them.
But All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, and it is election night in America once again. We begin tonight with some results from last week's primaries because the AP is now projecting that Republican Steve Hilton, a former Fox News host, Natch, will advance to the general election to stand before the voters of California this fall. Republicans did not get locked out of that race, as some in the party had feared there won't be a Dem-to-Dem head-to-head matchup. Hilton will face former HHS Secretary and California Attorney General Javier Becerra. But today, voters are heading to the ballot box in Nevada, South Carolina, North Dakota, and Maine, of course. As of right now, polls have just closed up in Maine, where there has been a ton of national attention. Of course, on the Democratic Senate primary. Now, a few weeks ago, this race was looking like a foregone conclusion. It may still prove to be tonight. There is, in this race, only one prohibitive favorite in the Democratic primary, Oysterman Marine Corps veteran Graham Plattner, who seemingly came out of nowhere. His closest opponent, the state's incumbent and outgoing Governor Janet Mills, has suspended campaigning, although she remains on the ballot. You know, Plattner has undeniable grassroots momentum. His anti-war stance, in particular, likely resonates with Democratic primary voters as Trump's war with Iran stretches past day 100, and we are still launching strikes against Iran even this very evening. In fact, it appears in just the last few hours. And having said that, Plattner is, as you may know, far from a perfect candidate. He has had to weather multiple controversies, including a tattoo on his chest that resembles a Nazi symbol, one that he says he did not know the meaning of until he got into the campaign, learned about it last fall. There's also a history of inflammatory posts on the social media site Reddit, as well as recent reports on his personal conduct, that he sent consensual, explicit text messages to other women while married, that some of his ex-girlfriends found his behavior unsettling. It was after that last story broke, reported in the New York Times, that we had Graham Plattner on this very program for an exclusive interview where he unequivocally denied the specific allegations in that article as they relate to any physical violence or abuse or rough handling or the knowledge of the tattoo. Throughout this campaign, Plattner has offered his story as one of redemption. He says after his multiple combat tours, and he did a number of them, that he returned home with PTSD. He describes a dark period of his life where he self-medicated with alcohol. But Plattner says he made it through with the help from his wife, from his community in Maine, and also with the support of the Department of Veterans Affairs and some of the benefits he got as a veteran from the federal government, benefits that he says he wants to see extended more universally and widely. So far, it seems like that story is resonating with many voters, although not all of them.
For all his faults, I mean, we all have faults, he is at least talking about the issues that matter, health care, decent jobs, that kind of thing.
I have some issues with Graham Plattner. I understand he's a populist candidate. He, espouses progressive policies. I think that's great. My main issue with him is I don't think he's been completely honest with voters throughout his campaign. He's been through ups and downs with the scandals.
For me, he's the most progressive candidate, and while I agree that there's some issues that have been coming up, and I wouldn't necessarily be like he's a phenomenal person, I do think that anywhere leaning more progressive as we possibly can right now is the direction we need to go.
Again, we should emphasize, as we wait for results tonight, that Plattner's the clear favorite in the race. I mean, barring a truly shocking upset tonight, the only question is how large his margin of victory would be. Now, while Janet Mills is not campaigning, she has so far refused to get behind Plattner. She's basically been telling any outlet in Maine that will listen she's still an eligible candidate in the ballot, that she suspended her campaign and didn't end it, that her name is right there. There's also a third candidate, a mainstream liberal named David Costello, who could also siphon some protest votes. Ahead of a likely Plattner victory and general election against incumbent Republican Susan Collins, there's been a lot of Democratic hand-wringing, especially outside of Maine, about candidate quality and recruitment. How do we get to this point? But it should not go unsaid as we look at Maine tonight, on this primary night. There's no shortage of well-qualified candidates in Maine. Many of them chose to participate in a very crowded primary for governor instead. That's also on the ballot in that state tonight. One hazards because that was seen as a much easier race, Democratic outgoing governor, no incumbent, than unseating Susan Collins, a nearly 30-year incumbent with a very strong electoral track record who has beaten back Dem challenger after Dem challenger. Head-to-head polling with Collins appears to show the controversies have dinged Plattner a bit, but, and this is sort of the crucial top line, it remains a very tight race. Democrats in Washington are hoping the party can finally coalesce around their candidate after tonight, when the focus will shift firmly to preventing Collins from winning a sixth term in the Senate. Notably, she has not faced voters since the Supreme Court overturned Roe, thanks in large part to her and her decision to help confirm Justice Brett Kavanaugh during Trump's first term. Tonight, we're also keeping an eye on the South Carolina gubernatorial primary. That's where Donald Trump has endorsed Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette over Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace. In large part, it seems because of Mace's support for releasing the Epstein files, although when you're talking about Nancy Mace, really, who can say? We start with Maine, where, again, seemingly any path to Democrats retaking the Senate in November will likely begin. MS Now reporter Kevin Fry joins me now from Blue Hill, Maine. Kevin, what have you been hearing today?
Yeah, I mean, look, you were kind of been touching on a lot of this, which is this twisting that voters are having to do between what they view as a really great message and perhaps an imperfect messenger. And to what extent are they willing to forgive the messenger because they like what they're hearing from him? We have heard from various voters over the course of the last days who have said that the latest scandals, the latest reporting has really taken the wind out of their sails. But as one woman told me at his town hall the other night, she was a volunteer. She had gotten some concern about some of these stories. She went there, and now she's back behind him 1,000%. So there is certainly that grassroots energy. But as you mentioned, we're keeping an eye on what exactly a protest vote might look like tonight. I was speaking with a source close to the Plattner campaign just a little bit ago. They are viewing anything exceeding a 60% showing for them this evening as a success. That's about in line with what some of the polling had been showing, while Mills was still very much a contender in this race before she put her campaign on suspend. The other thing to keep an eye on tonight, provided they get that sort of margin, which they're hoping will kind of put an end to these questions about whether or not Mills or some other person needs to step in, is that the speech tonight, I am being told, is going to be viewed as a bit of a reset, a chance for them to really move the focus on to Susan Collins and set up that dichotomy. They expect that issues like you were just touching on, Chris, like Roe v. Wade being overturned because of Brett Kavanaugh being on the Supreme Court, as being something that could finally undo Susan Collins' hold here. But again, it goes without saying that there is still a plenty of bedwetting here amongst Democrats, not just in Washington, but here as well, who are concerned about those stories that they've seen and that could have ripple effects as to whether or not Plattner will be able to pull this off in November. There are plenty of voters that we have heard from. I should say most of them say they're sticking with Plattner, but they have questions about, will there be another shoe to drop? What could the impact of that be? And if it's really bad, if it crosses a certain line, would they get to the point where they maybe just don't vote for Senate? They don't like Collins, but they're not comfortable with Plattner. That's one of the outstanding questions.
All right, Kevin Fry, who's there for us in Blue Hill, Maine on this election day. We've got the polls have closed there. Thank you, Kevin. Let's turn to MS Now Chief Data Reporter Ali Velshi at the Big Board with the latest. Ali, how are you looking at this?
Okay, a few things. No numbers in from Maine, but this conversation you've been having is something we're going to watch all night. I'm also going to just give you a quick update. As you know, we advanced in California. Steve Hilton will go to the runoff, the election. He'll be facing, it's not a runoff, he'll be the candidate in the election in November against Javier Becerra, the former Attorney General. Tom Steyer not going to make it to the finish line. We're at 89% of the vote, but the way we're calculating it, Tom Steyer is not going to be able to build it up. Let's go to the primary in South Carolina, where polls have closed right now. This one's really interesting. This is the vote, the primary for governor. 22% of the vote is in right now. Not a ton, but very notable to see what's going on. Pamela Yvette is in the lead. She's got 28% of that vote right now. Ralph Norman, sitting congressman, is in third place right now. And Nancy Mace is in fifth place right now, and she hasn't moved, by the way, much in her vote since this has been on for a while. So it is a runoff state if you don't get 50% of the vote. But for the moment, the two sitting members of Congress are not there. We're going to keep a very close eye on that. I'm also going to look at the race for Senate in South Carolina. You wouldn't be thinking about this too much, Chris, typically, because Lindsey Graham is running. But look at this, with 21% of the vote in, 59%. It's a sitting senator who hasn't crossed Donald Trump, I don't know, since 2015 or 2016. Back then, he used to say things about Donald Trump. He hasn't done that in a long time. He's got a challenge from his right, and he's got, look, these numbers may change, and we're only 21%, but there's a bit of a story here. Incumbent United States Senator who sort of velcroed to Donald Trump's hip is under 60% right now.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. We should note that South Carolina gubernatorial primary was one of these sort of classic, like Donald Trump beauty pageants of the Trump era, where more or less everyone is auditioning for his because it's a large field. And his endorsement is likely to be dispositive. That not always, but in most cases it has been, particularly large field. And she's the one that got it.
She's the one that got it. But look at that, the number two guy is not that far behind. What is interesting is Nancy Mace definitely didn't get it. You did make a good point. You never know what it is with Nancy Mace. But in this particular case, she claims to be the MAGA-est person in the race. But She doesn't like the Epstein files nonsense, and is separated from Donald Trump on that, and that seems to be showing tonight.
Yeah. All right, Ali, we're going to be checking back with you in a little bit because we have votes. The polling close in Maine. We don't have any vote in, but we will get some.
We'll track it closely.
Yeah, throughout this hour, and we'll take a look. All right. Alex Wagner is, of course, at MS Now, senior political analyst, host of the Runaway Country podcast from Crooked Media, author of the Substack How the Hell with Alex Wagner. Claire McCaskill is an MS Now analyst and former Democratic senator from Missouri, and they join me now. Let's start on Maine, Alex, and I'll start with you just in terms of that was interesting what Kevin said about a 60% benchmark. I think, we should say Maine has ranked choice voting. So if you didn't get above 50%, then it would go to those ranked choice. No one's, I think, anticipating it will be below 50%. But how do you view what we're looking for tonight and what it says about the status of this nominee in this key race?
I mean, 60% seems generous. It's not surprising that that's the number they're picking. I know that the great Steve Kornacki, who is not on this network, but who I still look to as an oracle, in addition to Ali Velshi, has the number pegged at 76% because that's where his polling, that's where his support was before this latest tranche of reporting came out. That's where he was. Can he get close to that? I think you hear it from the voters of Maine, though, Chris. I don't think they're giving up on Graham Plattner. I think they're making the calculation that Graham Plattner's worst day in his personal life is still better than Susan Collins' best day in the U.S. Senate in terms of the health of the country. And as you pointed out in the intro, this is the first time people have been able to show Susan Collins what they think of her enabling both the most corrupt president in American history and also overseeing the effective destruction of federal protection for reproductive health. And I think those things very much still stick in the minds of Maine voters. And they seem like they're making a calculation that they'd rather take, Graham Plattner's complicated, checkered, and allegedly, I would say toxic past over the very real record, not up for debate, that Susan Collins has as a senator.
Claire, it's also worth, I think, remembering 2020. There were two dynamics in 2020, which is the last time that Susan Collins has faced voters. One is that it was a bad polling year with bad polling misses. And for much of that race, the Democratic nominee in that race, a woman by the name of Sarah Gideon, was leading in that race. And then Collins ended up winning really by a lot. I think it was 9-point victory, right? So the polling was just a huge miss. But the other thing I would say about that miss was, Sarah Gideon, people were talking about, if we just had this, a scandal-free, generic Democratic, person who'd been vetted, that is who ran last time, more or less. Sarah Gideon, very clean record, sort of known to some of the voters, raised a ton of money. That did not work. So it's not like this has not been tried. Collins is formidable, and maybe something different is what the doctor has ordered in the strange times we live in.
Well, there's no question that this is a candidate that engendered a lot of passion on the part of the base of the Democratic Party in Maine. And Sarah Gideon never had that. So Sarah Gideon was, not somebody who excited people like Graham Plattner has excited them. Now, the question is, and the number I think that will be really interesting to look at, these stories really started breaking after the middle of May, right? It was I think the Wall Street Journal was May 24th, 25th, something like that in there. And then obviously just last Friday for the New York Times story. Early voting started in Maine, May 11th. So we're going to have a chance to look at his percentage among early voters versus the ones who vote today. And that's the number I want to look for. I want to find out if the enthusiasm of early voters has waned with the ones who are deciding today whether or not they want to personally mark Graham Plattner on the ballot. Having said all that, nobody knows better that Susan Collins is formidable than I. I know how formidable she is. And she works very, very hard, and Maine loves that. I mean, her timing couldn't have been better on her 10,000th vote in the U.S. Senate without ever having missed a vote. Mainers love that stuff. So Graham Plattner has a battle in front of him, and no one should kid themselves about that. The other thing that's going to be interesting here, and we'll talk about this later in the program, Chris, will Maine be essential for the Democrats to take to Senate? Are we going to end up with races in Iowa and Texas and Alaska and North Carolina and Ohio that allow a little bit of comfort to Democrats in terms of how many different places we can put together flipping 4 seats?
Yeah, and I mean, we should also say when we talk about 2020, right, or we talk about 22 or 24, like the overall political environment, Alex, right now, Donald Trump is, today, the latest poll we had on today is 35% approval rating. He's underwater by a lot in Texas. We're going to talk about that polling a little bit later. He's lost 2/3 of independents, and this isn't one poll. This is reliably time and time again in poll after poll after poll. So we are just in a different environment than we were in 2020, than we were in 22, than we were in 24. It's just new terrain now.
Yeah, okay. Number one, I just want to say I think we have 30,000 Mainers that have done early voting to answer Claire's question, and usually about a quarter of the state votes early. So that's, not an insignificant case study in terms of enthusiasm, right? Second, I believe the scientific term for where Trump is the toilet bowl. Like, it doesn't really get worse because traditionally, the incumbent party sees losses in the midterms. I think that obviously we are in terra incognita. We are in the middle of a war with no end in sight. No actual gains made. We have ongoing fighting, gas prices that are going to continue to rise through the summer, and a president who is so addled and incoherent that he's falling asleep at Knicks games and unable to state to Kristen Welker who the supreme leader of Iran is. I mean, it's a disaster back and forth. So yeah, is it a different political environment than 2020? I would say so.
All right, Alex Wagner, Claire McCaskill, we're going to check in back with you in a little bit. Don't go anywhere. We're going to keep you updated on all the results as they keep coming in. Meanwhile, Donald Trump ramps up the Big Lie 2.0. Carol Leonnig joins me right here next. You might have noticed the Big Lie is back, although truthfully it never went away. Just 5 years after the violent Capitol insurrection, MAGA is pushing another equal parts deranged and idiotic election conspiracy theory, this time centered on California.
That's how they count the votes in California. You know why they're doing that? Because they're cheating on the election.
Do you have evidence to support
all
that?
I have to do is look.
They are still counting the votes. Do you trust this election?
That seems pretty shady to me.
I think California is playing around with us.
But what evidence is there to prove that there was rigged?
Some of these efforts are so diabolical and so far upstream it is impossible to prove. But I think everybody knows instinctively something is wrong here.
No one, not everyone knows it instinctively because there's nothing wrong here with the California primary. They're counting the votes. They're counting the votes, by the way, as our own Jacob Sobras has shown, in a room with glass panels so you can watch them do it. It's not fraud. The case Republicans are making, it's impossible to prove, so trust their instincts, is manifestly preposterous and absurd. But again, so was Trump's big lie in 2020 and 2021, right? I mean, it's essentially identical. And look what happened. Look what that led to on January 6th. And this case looks, to me, like it is setting the table to invalidate midterm results in November if Republicans perform as badly as expected. Yesterday, Trump's first assistant U.S. attorney for Central California went on Glenn Beck's podcast, of all places, to promise investigations and charges for voter fraud in the state's primary, while also asking listeners to offer evidence of voter fraud, because, of course, he doesn't actually have any. Carol Leonnig is a senior investigative reporter with MS Now, co-author of Injustice, How Politics and Fear Vanquished America's Justice Department, a timely book. As we discuss this, she joins me now. Good to have you here.
Great to be here, Chris.
So let's just, first I just want to sort of set for the table that there is, again, we don't have like a universal windows into everything that has happened in this election, but there is zero evidence whatsoever. This is entirely ginned up. I also just want to say up front that, it doesn't make any sense as an election conspiracy theory. It was clearly the case that Karen Bass wanted to run against a Republican, Spencer Pratt, in a city that is 75% Democratic, as opposed to a far more threatening challenger. Also, how did they rig it to lock out the Republicans from the mayoral, but not from the state, right? None of this makes sense. What is the role that the Justice Department is now playing in this?
Well, I want to say, let me tell you all the ways, let me count the ways in which the Department of Justice is breaking its own rules going back for a long, long time. Number one, An acting or de facto U.S. attorney, as Bill Essayli is in the Central District of California, doesn't announce he's going to investigate potential voter fraud. There were strong rules that you don't say you're investigating that unless you come up with the evidence and you bring the charges. Because in America, we used to not want to sow distrust in voting unless we had the goods. But instead, this person's going to go on Glenn Beck and say, we're going to investigate. And then ask people, number two, interesting norm buster, ask people for evidence. That's also something Department of Justice officials and FBI agents don't do. Crowdsource evidence.
On the internet.
That's super strange. Third thing in which we are counting the ways that these are a violation of either Department of Justice rules, prosecutor manuals, and norms about protecting our democracy. And that is that the acting, again, de facto U.S. attorney says he promises there's likely going to be charges. Who does that?
How can you do that?
Well,
I mean, it's not like there has to be facts in a crime. You can't say that before you've actually figured it out.
Well, when I heard and then reread with my own eyes the transcript from the Glenn Beck show, it just reminded me, as your setup so beautifully described, May of 2020, when Donald Trump is hearing that he's tanking in the polls, that he looks like a shambolic president who can't handle the pandemic. His his Attorney General, Bill Barr, says, I'm getting a bad feeling. I think you're going to lose this election if you don't do something different. Donald Trump starts talking about how all this way we count votes, all the way ballots are stored, some are mailed in, it's likely to be fraud. I'm worrying about fraud. And that drumbeat begins as soon as he knows he's in the basement in terms of popularity.
I want to play, just to give a taste of, this is the sort of first assistant U.S. attorney who's sort of acting as a U.S. attorney, again, because they love actings and they love the Vacancy Reform Act, and no one ever gets confirmed and everyone's getting shoved in what position. Bill Essayli, here he is on Glenn Beck, just to give people a taste of what it sounded like. Take a listen.
I will just say it will be election fraud charges in the next, I hate to put timelines on things, but 1 to 2 months. I believe we need the some of these results to be certified so we can prove some of the allegations. But we will be charging some people. What we need right now are witnesses. If you saw someone collecting ballots in a suspicious way or doing something odd with ballots, we want to know about that.
Again, I mean, you've pointed out, but this is just no one that we have ever covered in our careers or lives has talked like this from that perch, right? I mean, that's a fair thing to say.
It's a totally fair thing to say. It's strange on the three elements that are gross violations. There are many, many others. We won't go into all of them tonight. But, Chris, I'm so glad you're focusing a lens on this, because it is part of a broader thing going inside the Trump administration that I'm hearing from sources, both investigators and administration officials who are disturbed by this. And that broader plot is anybody who wants to please the king starts parroting that there's fraud. I'm going to open an investigation of fraud. There's likely fraud. This is, forgive me, I just am spilling my tea over here. So acting U.S. attorneys, or de facto ones, or ones who want to get the job permanently, or, for example, our acting attorney general, begin announcing, I think there's fraud.
We should also say, because I started with January 6th, is that one of the crucial parts of the January 6th plot that didn't end up happening was an effort to essentially install a Trump loyalist in the Department of Justice, to issue a letter from the Department of Justice announcing with the official seal of the Department of Justice and imprimatur that there was suspicion of fraud in Georgia and other states. They're going to send them out to a bunch of states saying, you are hereby just don't, your results are essentially not real. And it came this close to them sending it out, and it would have wildly changed things if it weren't for people inside the Justice Department who said, hell no, over our dead bodies.
There were 9, count them 9, top senior Department of Justice officials who swarmed on a Sunday night to the Oval Office to convince Donald Trump they'd all resign and Passel Moore would.
And that it would blow up in his face, so it's not worth doing. He didn't back off because he thought they were right and he was wrong. It was just that it would be too bad.
The Deputy Attorney General said to the person you're referencing, Jeff Clark, we're not going to do this. Everyone's going to resign if we do this, and you should go back to what you actually know, which is if there's an oil spill, we'll call you.
Yeah, exactly. So just a reminder that they tried this play. They didn't have the people in position to be able to pull it off from the head of DOJ. This time around, as we see it, you really got to think about what that looks like with this personnel, particularly as we see what's happening in California. Carol Leonnig, always great to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still ahead with just over 5 months until Election Day. Do Democrats have a real chance of taking back the Senate? That's next. The reason everyone's so focused on tonight's primary in Maine is that it's part of this broader attempt by Democrats to take back the Senate. And to be clear, about a year ago, Democrats taking the Senate in 2026 looked very unlikely, nearly insurmountable. It now looks extremely possible, not favored, not guaranteed, but like really a real possibility in places like Maine, but not just Maine. We now have new statewide polling for 2 of the states that are in the kind of hardest reach tier for Democratic pickups, Texas and Iowa. In Texas, the Democratic candidate is a dead heat with the Republican candidate. In Iowa, Democrats say their polling also shows a dead heat. Now, one could argue that these numbers are part of a larger trend. As you know, the president himself, a guy who got just absolutely thunderingly, mercilessly booed on national television by everyone in the arena at the NBA Finals game in New York City last night. The guy who appeared to be, I don't know what you describe it, resting his eyes during the game itself. That guy is polling at a near record low 35% approval. Claire McCaskill and Alex Wagner are back with us. Claire, you teed this up, right? As we talk about what the kind of playing field looks like, where are the pickup opportunities. Let's talk about the Texas poll today, because again, when people are sort of loosey with the football with this, and it's been literally decades since any Democrat won any statewide office, including like railroad commissioner or ag commissioner or anything. But this is a high quality poll. This is a poll that shows, the generic ballot in the state with a Republican lead by 6. It shows the Greg Abbott up by 5 or 6 points. So sort of consistent with a difficult atmosphere for Republicans, but a dead heat between Tallarico and Ken Paxton. What do you think?
Well, listen, Ted Cruz and Donald Trump are not the most popular guys in Texas right now. And I got to tell you, let's put Ted out there more campaigning for Paxton, because the women voters hearing that Tallarico's problem is he's not masculine enough. I mean, really? That is nuts. I mean, that is just not a way to convince people to vote for Paxton, who is obviously corruption riddled. So, listen, we've got Alaska, we've got Texas, we've got Iowa, we've got North Carolina. Sherrod Brown is ahead against Husted in Ohio.
In the latest poll, yeah.
If we hold Michigan and hold Georgia, and Ossoff is in a strong position down there right now, then Maine, if Plattner pulls it off, would be whipped cream and cherry on top. It wouldn't even be part of the ice cream needed for the sundae.
This is the Burgess Everett, Alex. This is Republican senators were presented with tough polling numbers in some key races today at the NRSC. Bleak or challenging were some of the descriptions of them afterward. Also, Republicans were giving messaging plan to turn them around. One said afterward they are optimistic. And one of the things that I think is sort of worth talking about here, I mean, you've got a situation where voters are very clear about what their biggest priority is, right? Things are too expensive. They don't like the way the economy is going. They don't like the war particularly. Today, they've managed to pass in the Congress with, again, these sitting senators, like $70 billion more dollars for ICE and DHS, which brings the grand total of money given to those agencies to $240 billion in the last year, $250 billion. So it's like, whatever you think about the Republican Party, whatever you think about their political challenges, it's very hard to see to me the things they are doing being responsive at all to like the median swing voter concern that they need to do to get back to par in this environment.
it's not even like it doesn't even qualify as a hat tip towards the concerns of their constituents. I mean,
Yes.
like, I think the Votorama reconciliation fiasco of last week is like such a telling episode that the most vulnerable senators on the Republican side of
Yes.
the aisle sort of make this late night attempt to vote their conscience and are given leeway to do so by John Thune, all to amount to a hill of beans. I mean, they were tasked by the American public, by their constituents, with making sure Trump wouldn't set up a $1.8 billion slush fund for January 6 insurrectionists and cop beaters. And they couldn't even do that. They just made these kind of gestures towards not doing that, hoping that that would be enough to carry them over the finish line when it comes to November. I mean, the level of cowardice that they're operating with is almost, it would be comic if it wasn't so pathetic. And then they have in the White House, the leader, the titular leader of their party, doesn't care about gas prices, doesn't know what gas prices are, doesn't know who he's fighting in Iran, doesn't know who's negotiating the peace process to end the war that's created the global economic tailspin. I mean, it is, I really don't think we've seen this level of both incompetence and I keep saying the word cowardice. The combination of the two things is just a powerful aphrodisiac to get people over to the Democratic side of the aisle, which is why you see, James Tallarico is running neck and neck with Paxton, but among independents, he's leading 18 points. He's leading 10 points among Latinos in Texas. The numbers in all those swing states that Claire mentioned, we're in June right now, Chris. Gas is going to go up to $6 a gallon.
Well, that's the big question, right? I mean, the old quote about, what's the hardest part of governing, Claire McCaskill, a British foreign minister once said, events, my dear boy, events. And again, we're on, like I'm talking about on the night of the deal that was supposed to happen. We've had now, strikes exchanged between a U.S. Apache helicopter being downed and the U.S. with retaliatory strikes. We had strikes exchanged between Iran and Israel. I don't think gas... there's a lot of warnings, Claire, out there about how dire the sort of inventory situation is, but the events are going to play a role here too, as much as the campaigns and the fundraising and all that stuff.
Yeah, and you talked about Lindsey earlier. Those votes against Lindsey Graham in that primary are about the war. They are about his position. Really hawkish position, which is so yesterday in the Republican Party. I want to point out, sometimes this is painful because a lot of our viewers don't want to hear this, but the states that are in play now, there are not enough Democrats to elect these candidates. Independent voters will decide who controls the United States Senate. Yes. It will not be there. We're not going to magically grow millions and millions and millions of Democrats between now and November. We are going to have to use our messaging to make sure we are focused not just on the base, which deserves some populism and some progressive stances, but also on independent voters who are sick of the incompetence because they can't pay their bills.
Yeah, I mean, Harris lost Iowa by, I want to say 14 points. Like, you have to win some people, a lot of people
Trust me,
that
I
voted
know.
for Donald. Yeah, right, exactly. Well, yes, you're going to have to win a lot of people that voted for Donald Trump. Alex Wagner and Claire McCaskill, stay with us. We're going to check in with Ali Velshi for the latest numbers on this election night in America. Right after this, don't go anywhere. On this election night in 4 states, we're still monitoring Maine's Democratic Senate primary, where votes are starting to trickle in to decide whether Democrat Clarence Plattner will, in fact, take on incumbent Republican Susan Collins in November. But we also, of course, are still sifting through the results in California as well. Ali Velshi is the big board with updates. What's the latest from Maine? Let's start there, Ali.
Let's start with Maine, where we have very little of the vote in right now, less than 1% of the vote in. Graham Plattner's leading, but again, the lead is 452 votes. He's got 68%. It's just interesting because Janet Mills was in the race. She made it clear that she's not out of the race. She suspended her campaign and then has given a few interviews where she said, I'm still in the race, but no one has put any money or any effort into it. So this we're going to watch very, very closely to see what's going on in Maine. I want to go to the Senate. I was just telling you about the Senate race in South Carolina. So let me just get to that for a second. We were talking about the fact that Lindsey Graham was in an interesting battle here. He has been...
that is interesting.
He has been advanced, but again, 60%. This is a guy who's been a senator who has done no wrong to Donald Trump, challenged by somebody on his right who's got 27.5% of the vote in, with 45% of the vote so far. Let's look at the gubernatorial race in South Carolina. Again, Pamela Yvette, the Trump-endorsed lieutenant governor, at 30% right now. Ralph Norman, a member of the House, at 16.5%, and Nancy Mace at 11%. You have to have 50% to win outright, otherwise you advance to a primary. So right now, the two members of Congress who are in this race for South Carolina governor have not advanced yet and may not advance. California, we told you a little earlier, in the governor's race, Steve Hilton has advanced to the primary, but I want to show you a couple of House races that are of interest. Kevin Kiley, you'll remember, was the incumbent in California 6. This was redistricted. He suddenly became an independent because he thought that's the only way that he could win. It was primary night in California when we advanced him to be in the runoff. We have now advanced Richard Pan, who, if you can see, these numbers are pretty close with 92% of the vote in. So it is possible that a Democrat will have a chance in that district. I want to move to District 7 in California. This was Doris Matsui, the incumbent, being challenged by Mai Vang, who is, I think, 40 years younger than she is or something. It's a young versus older competition. 95% of the vote in right now. And Mai Vang not only is advancing to the runoff, but is in the lead. She's ahead of Doris Matsui. And I want to go down here to California 40. This Young Kim is advancing as well. This is two incumbents now who are going to be in the race, which means District 40 will be a Republican district. This was actually redistricted to be a little more Republican in the way that California was redistricted. You might call it a sacrificial lamb. It was probably expected that this was going to be a Republican in the end. Now it's guaranteed that it'll be a Republican, Chris.
And I just want to reiterate, it was a week ago that this election took place. We were all here. The votes, there's a bunch of ways you can vote in California. You can vote in person, you can vote by mail. You can mail it on the day of the election, which means there's going to be a little bit of latency. That's why things are trickling in.
It's normal. It's a feature. It's not a bug.
Yes.
This nonsense that you were very accurately reporting on is just nonsense.
Yeah.
Everybody, the whole country knows this. We talked about it. And if you live in California, you know very, very well that it is a complex and rich process to vote in California. Takes time, takes energy, takes intellectual work, but it actually works, and it just takes a few days. Relax.
And we should just I want to show that Kevin Kiley again, because that's an important one. We talked about District 40, which was redrawn to be more Republican. That's, you take two incumbents, you put them in the same district, right? This is one that is drawn to be a Dem pickup.
Correct.
There was a little bit of worry that maybe two Republicans,
that's correct,
a Republican and an independent, and Kevin Kiley would make it through. That's not true. So this will be basically an R versus D, although he calls himself an independent now, but he's been a Republican.
That's right.
And that is likely to be, that is projected by the Democratic Party to be a pickup. Of course, the voters will have the final say.
We'll keep on watching that, but that one's basically decided at this point.
All right, let's go back to Maine if we can. I don't know if we have any reason to think that there is more.
Let's take a look. Yeah, we're still under 1%. The lead has increased to 800 votes, and the margin has increased. Graham Plattner now with 71% of the vote to Janet Mills, 18.5%. But these are very, very, very small numbers,
tiny.
And very small percentage. We are waiting to see. Remember, this part of Maine, which I like to call Canada, is very sparsely populated. Maine's population centers are all along here. Its major cities are all along here. So we're going to wait and see what happens here. But at the moment, Graham Plattner enjoying a lead, but less than 1% in.
We should also note, because I noted at the top, there is a gubernatorial primary in Maine tonight, and that is for to run for governor after Janet Mills. And that's interesting only because you will see Angus King III there, that, of course, being the son of Angus King, who is sitting senator. That's right. You will see Hannah Pingree there, that, of course, being the daughter of Shelley Pingree, who's a member of Congress. And you also see Nirav Shah, who is the health commissioner in the state.
And became very well known there, certainly during COVID.
And according to approval rating, polling is basically the most popular politician in the state. And the reason I say all that is because those are all people who opted to run for this race.
Not to the Senate race.
And not to the Senate race.
The point you made is there are a lot of very highly qualified Democrats in Maine. They're all in this race.
That's right. I just want to show that there because
most of them are in this race.
Yes, and that will probably we will go to ranked choice voting, and so that's going to take a while there. So Ali Velshi.
And again, it might take a while, and that's also normal.
Yes,
because
exactly.
If you start hearing somebody complaining about that, that's the way it goes.
All right, Ali Velshi, great to have you as always at the big board. I want to thank you. I also want to thank Alex Wagner and Clara McCaskill for hanging with me through the hour. What a delight to have them both. Be sure, of course, to check out Alex on Crooked on MS Now, a weekly series that highlights the best moments of the week from Crooked Media's chart-topping podcasts. That's Saturdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. Stay tuned. In just a few minutes, Jen Psaki will speak to Annie Andrews, who's hoping to be the Democrat to take on Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. We'll be right back. That is all in on this Tuesday night. Our live election coverage continues now with Jen Psaki. Good evening, Jen.
Chris, I mean, there's a lot to watch, and I know you've been talking about Maine. We'll be talking about Maine. Lots happened in that race. I am kind of obsessed with South Carolina, though, too. I know you were talking with Claire and Alex about this. I mean, there is Lindsey Graham facing his big challenge. There's also Nancy Mace, who's currently in 4th or 5th place. We'll talk to Ali Velshi. Lots going on there. Remember when she was the anti-trans bathroom crusader, culture warrior? Here she is. Didn't work.
Yeah.
There we are.
She's made a lot of decisions, questionable decisions, in her political life over the last few years, but they don't seem to have cashed out based on how things are going tonight.
Nope. We'll see. Anyway, we'll be watching all of it very closely, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Catch up tomorrow.
Okay, everyone, as we were just talking about, it is election night in 4 states across this country. There is a lot we are watching tonight. We're going to keep you updated on all of it. We're going to move things around if we need to, because there's a lot of things to watch. Now, in Maine, Democrats are voting to decide which candidate will, of course, face off against Republican Senator Susan Collins in November. You can see that on the screen right there. Only 1% in at this point in time. We'll be watching it closely. And Graham Plattner, of course, a military veteran and plain-speaking populist anti-war oysterman, came into the race, remember, as a virtual unknown last summer. Most people didn't really know who he was in the state. And then by this spring, despite an avalanche of controversies, his surge in support in the state was enough to prompt his chief opponent, Governor Janet Mills, to suspend her campaign in April. I mean, and she was a pretty popular governor in Maine, still is a pretty popular governor. Although her name, I would note, it remains on the ballot, which is something that she has actually pointed out publicly in recent weeks. Then in just the last 10 days, another series of news stories was published about Plattner, revealing that he was sexting with women while he was married, as well as some concerning details that were alleged about his past relationships. So we're just starting to see votes trickle in out of that race, and we have Ali Velshi standing by at the big board to track those numbers as they come in. Yep, we're watching it very, very closely, but only 1% is in, as you can see on your screen right now. And right now, with 1%, Graham Plattner does have a big lead, but lots to go. We're also watching several other big races in Maine, including the primaries for governor. So there's no incumbent running in that race, but there are still a lot of recognizable names, including the son of a U.S. senator, the daughter of a congresswoman, and a member of the Bush family. Just a whole group of people who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps there, everyone, competing against each other there. We're also watching the primary race for a crucial seat for Democrats this November, which is Maine's 2nd congressional district. Now, this is a district that Trump won by 9 points back in 2024 when he faced Vice President Harris. But despite that lopsided margin, the Democrats still managed to hold on to that seat. But this year, incumbent Democratic congressman, the guy who held on to that seat despite Trump winning by 9 points, is not seeking re-election. And now 4 Democrats are vying to replace him on the ticket. So whoever wins will take on Maine's controversial former Republican governor, Paula LePage, in the general election for that Trump-friendly district. Now, we're also keeping a close eye on primary races in South Carolina, where polls closed 2 hours ago. We can now project that Trump's favorite Senate bootlicker, Lindsey Graham, beat back a primary challenge after spending a whole host of money from furniture store magnate Mark Lynch, which was essentially a proxy battle between MAGA factions who have been divided over Trump's war in Iran, which is pretty interesting on its own. And late today, we got a stark reminder that that war is anything but over. thanks to the Trump administration, of course. Now, just a few hours before polls closed, Trump launched new strikes against Iran, and what he said was retaliation for the downing of a U.S. helicopter yesterday. Graham, who is, again, a staunch defender of Trump's war, maybe the staunchest of defenders, will face off against the victor of South Carolina's Democratic primary for Senate, who is projected to be physician Annie Andrews. You can see her on the screen. She's going to be joining me here later this hour to talk all about that race, too. Tonight, we also got to have our eye on the Republican primary for governor in South Carolina, where the Trump-endorsed lieutenant governor is facing off against 4 other candidates, including Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace, I just mentioned this, who says Trump rejected her over her vote to release the Epstein files. And while tonight is all about the primaries, it's really, as any of these primary nights are, the start of the general election in these states, specifically in that Maine Senate race, which Democrats see as key to their path to win back control of the upper chamber. So that's where I want to start tonight with my good friend Ali Velshi, who's over at the big board tirelessly as always. So let's get straight to him. Ali, what are we seeing in these races right now?
Well, let's start. You really outlined a lot of it very, very clearly, but let's start in Maine right now. We have less than 1% of the vote in right now. Graham Plattner with a lead of 1,000 votes, but that's 71.6% to Janet Mills, 18%. This has been fairly consistent. In fact, Graham Plattner's lead as a percentage has increased, but I just want to be very, very clear. We're talking about less than 1% of the votes in. All of these counties in blue have some vote in. There's no county in which Graham Plattner is not winning, but again, the numbers are small. The counties in yellow, we have no vote yet. So that's Bangor, Augusta, Portland. We still don't have any vote there. So yet to see what's going on. Janet Mills has had a very interesting, couple of weeks in which she's made the point of saying that she's still on the ballot, but no money or particular effort has gone into her campaign. So we're going to watch for a million reasons everything that's going on in Maine, including the fact that this was one of the more obvious paths to Democratic control of the Senate. Let's see what happens in there. I want to pull back to the GOP primaries in South Carolina. You talked about this a lot. This is really interesting. Lindsey Graham has won. You have to have 50%. It's a southern state where you need 50% of the vote. He's got it. 58.7%. You know this better than I do, Jen. What did Lindsey Graham do to deserve that? I mean, there are a whole bunch of people who get shellacked for stuff. Why has Lindsey Graham got a runner-up at 27.3%? And by the way, when we called that race, we called Annie Andrews first. In other words, the Democrat running against, who will be running against Lindsey Graham, got called before we were actually able to call the race for Lindsey Graham. So just a lot of interesting things going on in South Carolina, including in the gubernatorial primary. Here's the interesting part. This is Lieutenant Governor Pamela Yvette. You need to advance to a runoff if you don't get 50% of the vote. The way it's breaking down, no one will get 50% of the vote. She's advancing. Alan Wilson is advancing. Those two will advance. Look who's not advancing. This is only 56% of the vote, but we know what this is going to turn out to be. Ralph Norman, a sitting United States congressman, in 3rd place. Nancy Mace, 11.5%. She is actually claimed to be the most MAGA person in this race, but for the fact that she went up against Donald Trump on the Epstein files, and she's getting punished for that tonight. So interesting stories every way you cut it in South Carolina. Again, all eyes on Maine. What we did talk about a little earlier, I just want to remind you of this. In California, Steve Hilton has advanced to be in the gubernatorial primary. He will, Tom Steyer is not going to be able to make up the difference. 91% of the vote is in there. We do have a couple of specific things I just want to show you here. Kevin Kiley in District 6, we advanced him on Tuesday during the primaries. He will face off against Richard Pan, a Democrat. This is a redistricted constituency. Kevin Kiley went from being a Republican to being an independent to try and win in that district. He'll now face off against a Democrat. If you look just below that in District 7, you remember this, you were talking about this last week, Doris Matsui, the incumbent, we advanced her last week, but Mai Vang, who is, I think, 40 years her junior, has now taken the lead. The two of them will advance to face off against one another. And I'll just tell you one final one in District 40 in Southern California. It will be 2 Republicans. It was designed this way during redistricting, that it would likely be a Republican district, but it will be 2 Republicans, including Young Kim, the incumbent, facing off against Kevin Calvert, squishing 2 Republicans into one district.
So interesting, Ali, as always. And all such a reminder. We talked about the Red Mirage last week. It takes time in California.
Yes.
This is all a reminder of that. As is the LA mayoral race. Thank you so much. We're gonna check back in with you over the course of the hour. So stay hydrated as always. Okay, I want to turn back to Maine, and MS Now's Alex Tabbitt, who's on the ground in Portland, Maine, and has been talking to voters there all day long. So many eyes on this race. Alex, you've been on the ground all day. You've been talking to voters all across the state. What have those voters been telling you?
That's right, Jen. We've been talking to about dozens and dozens of different voters, most of whom voted for Graham Plattner, and they really fall into two different buckets. The first bucket is Graham Plattner voters who rolled up to this polling location behind me like this, holding their nose, not happy about the slew of recent controversies and scandals surrounding Plattner, but recognizing that he is really their only hope of unseating incumbent Republican Senator Susan Collins, who's represented the state of Maine in the halls of the Senate since 1997. I want you to hear what those voters had to say about the recent controversies surrounding Plattner.
It didn't stop me from making the decision. I'm not enthused by a lot of them. Some of them are a little tough to want to put like a bumper sticker on my car or anything, but it didn't stop me from voting.
If someone is going to come in and do the right thing for the working people of Maine, I kind of have to let that be more important than some personal decisions people made when they were younger and in a bad place.
And the second bucket of voters was much smaller that we spoke to. It was all young men, and they saw these recent scandals as some sort of calculated smear campaign against Plattner. And they told us that those scandals, those controversies, actually galvanized them to go out and vote for Plattner even more. Jen?
Alex Tabbitt, nothing is more interesting than talking to voters and hearing what they actually think. Thank you for being out there. Okay, and joining me now are two people I've been dying to talk to tonight about all of this that's happening. Jim Messina is the former campaign manager for Barack Obama's 2012 re-election campaign, and Alex Seitzold is deputy editor of Maine's Mid-Coast Villager, and one of the smartest people reporting on this race right now. If you don't follow him, you should absolutely follow him. I'm sure Jim and I both follow him. Okay. Jim, let me start with you. We only have kind of a fraction of the results in so far. In Maine, that's really literally a fraction, 1%. But some things we know, South Carolina, other places, we'll know more as the evening proceeds in Maine. But what are you watching for tonight? What has stood out to you about what we've learned so far?
Well, Jen, there's two truisms in the Democratic Party. Wine is good, and this is going to be the year we beat Susan Collins. Like, we just have been believing this for a very, very long time. There is no credible path to getting control of the United States Senate if we can't beat Susan Collins. And so, the whole world, especially in D.C., is looking to see how much damage Plattner has done to himself, how big is his margin going to be. He's clearly going to win. But, and whether there's going to sort of be a reverb. I thought your reporter had it exactly right. There's a bunch of voters who are going to say, hey, everyone's smearing him, everyone makes mistakes. Voters in the end don't care as much about that stuff. They want to know if these candidates are in it for them. They want to know that these candidates are going to make the working families' lives better. And I think that's where Plattner has to get the race back to. I also think South Carolina is incredibly interesting. You have a modern Republican Party that is just at war with itself over some of the biggest issues in front of us, including Iran, including populism, including tariffs. And you saw that. Lindsey Graham had to spend $13 million to get through a primary against people we don't know. Nancy Mace, who, in my opinion, may be the most MAGA person I've ever met, finishes fifth because she did the right thing on one vote in her entire career. This is a party that just cannot decide what it wants to be, and you're seeing these fights in the Republican primary. We saw it last week when you and I were together in Iowa. You're seeing it again tonight, and the Republicans are going to have a real tough time in 2028 figuring out which side of their party is going to be the nominee for president.
Especially, it's Iran war. It's a proxy over the Iran war in South Carolina. Okay, we'll come back to that, Alex. Plattner's campaign, it's created a lot of enthusiasm. You're actually on the ground. They've defied political gravity in many ways for those of us who are not on the ground. But he's also earned, he said, a lot of coverage, negative coverage of allegations from the past. You've been there. You've been talking to people. Have you seen a shift? And recently, over the last 10 days, week and a half, we heard a little bit of this from Alex Tabbitt's reporting, but you've actually been talking to probably far more voters than even that. What have you seen?
Yeah, Jen, I mean, it's definitely been a shift in attitude, in feeling, in vibes, if you will. And a lot of the joy, the energy, the enthusiasm that really marked the early months of the Graham Plattner campaign, including during last fall's issues around the Reddit post and the tattoo, that's been sucked out of the room a little bit. And the kind of Teflon that he seemed to have, the shield that he seemed to have, has withered a little bit. People are uncomfortable. They're heartbroken, as one voter put it to me. But as Alex reported, most Democrats that I've talked to say they're still going to vote for him in November because, as Jim just pointed out, Democrats in Maine have been trying to get rid of Susan Collins for years. She keeps winning, and she wins because she has this unique ability, almost unheard of in this day and age, to actually win crossover voters. In 2020, something like 57,000 people voted for Joe Biden at the top of the ticket, and then Susan Collins below her, and she could have done it by my back-of-the-envelope math at around 22,000. So the question, as with any close race, and I think this will be a close race and always was going to be a close race, is on the margins. And her swing voters are not working-class white, former labor union guys. It's older, educated women on the coast who like Collins, who think she's reasonable, think she's a good senator. And even, a small portion of them deciding, I'm going to vote for her one more time. I don't trust this Plattner guy. It could make a difference because the big question hanging over all of this is there more to come? And even the fear of more to come for Plattner could dampen enthusiasm. His supporters, his campaign is convinced that this is the floor, but Republicans and some others think that there's lower to go from here.
We certainly don't know. I mean, we don't know if anything else or if allegations or anything else will come out. Maybe there will be, or maybe that's the end of the allegations. We'll see. But even with what they have to work with at this point, I mean, primary voters and that electorate is very different from the general election electorate as well. And to Alex's point, they now have to just keep Democrats with them, which they've really done to date. We'll see what happens tonight. But they also need to win over independents, Republicans, some of these Republican women. Jim, if you were them, how do you, I know they want to turn the page on this, but how do they do that? Does he still need to keep addressing it? What do you do if you're them?
If you're them, you go to the other thing we haven't talked about in this race, and his name is Donald Trump. You look at his numbers in Maine, and you just make this race about a referendum on Donald Trump and explain that Susan Collins says one thing in Maine, but then goes to D.C. and votes to make your gas prices more expensive, votes to make your grocery prices more expensive. You tie her to Donald Trump and make this a referendum, which is what midterm elections usually are. Susan Collins has been able to kind of not make that happen in the past, but she's never had a unpopular incumbent like Donald Trump on top of her campaign. And so Plattner is going to try to make this race about Donald Trump, and that fits right exactly into what the Democratic playbook is. And it will scare the kind of swing women that we were just talking about, who are going to have to decide which version of Susan Collins they want to believe in. And it's going to be pretty clear by the end of this campaign that Donald Trump's going to be her biggest problem.
It's the Trump factor, in the past, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Alex, I want to ask you this question, because Susan Collins has voted, by our numbers, you tell me if this is right, 96% of the time with Trump, but there have been a number of times on votes that Democrats are running on in other places, like the big ugly bill. She's also kind of flipped a bit on the Iran war. If you're Plattner, tell us about kind of the dynamics of Trump and the view of Trump. I know he's not popular, but if you're him, you're running against Trump, you're running against the war. Where are Mainers on all of these issues that are kind of flowing in the national dialogue?
Yeah, you're running against all of that and more. And the kind of establishment, the system overall. I mean, this was the only state that Ross Perot came close to winning electoral votes back in 1992. It's a very strong libertarian streak, a strong, kind of small business, anti-big everything state. And I think Plattner can tap into that. And I think Jim is right about Trump. Susan Collins does not want to talk about being a Republican. She doesn't want to talk about Donald Trump. She talks about being a senator from Maine who brings back lots of money, who is a good representative. It's a very kind of apolitical message that she's trying to push. And as much as Plattner reminds voters about her votes especially for the Supreme Court around Brett Kavanaugh and the overturning of Roe v. Wade, that's the issue that for a lot of those women that we've been talking about really pushes them back into the Democratic corner. And I also think that Plattner has done an effective job of there's this perception in Maine, there's Mainers and then there's from away. And Plattner has turned all of these negative headlines into a perception that this is stuff that's from away, that's trying to attack our way of life and who we are. And he's the Mainiest Mainer who ever did Maine. So, that hits deep in the core of a lot of Mainers and has helped insulate him, I think, from some of these attacks and really bonded him with his supporters in a way that has kept them with him despite all the bad headlines.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me is just the anti-establishment, anti-Washington theme we're seeing all across the country. And he looks very uncomfortable at a Washington, D.C. fundraiser, which I think works in a lot of places. Jim, I always ask you this, but, Democrats will say Maine is just part of the path. I know you might say that, too. Maine seems pretty pivotal to the path. What do you think?
Yeah, when you run the scenarios, as you know, I'm a data nerd, and we run 60,000 some scenarios on the Senate, and you just kind of have to have Maine. Yes, there are other theories, but it's tough to see us winning states like Iowa, states like Texas, and not winning Maine. Like Maine is the one, it's the most Democratic. Obviously, Harris won by 7 points. We just don't have any other states like that. So yes, there's a chance to do it without Maine, but boy, it gets really tough. And you just got to think you got to have Maine.
Alex Seitzwald, thank you as always for your excellent reporting and for keeping us grounded on what's actually happening on the ground. Thanks for taking the time tonight. And Jim Messina, I'm going to ask you to stay around because we got more to discuss, more politics to discuss. The results are, of course, still rolling in from across 4 states right now. Ali Velshi is going to let us know as soon as we've got more from the vote in Maine. And we also just got a big call out of California that makes Donald Trump's claims of a rigged election out there look even more ludicrous than they already did. We're just getting started tonight. We'll be right back. Okay, everyone, we told you we'd keep you updated, and the Associated Press has just projected Graham Plattner has won the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate in Maine. He's addressing supporters right now, so let's listen in.
That we can change our politics and change our country, then you must also believe that people can change. And the reason I believe that is because I have lived it. And the reason that I have lived it is because of my wife. Amy, 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 Amy. Amy Jane, you are my best friend and the love of my life. And thank you. Over the last 9 months, I have seen Mainers come together behind a vision to take back our power from corporations and billionaires. I love every single one of you, everyone who has shown up at a town hall, who has knocked on a door, who cast their vote, not for me, but for a vision of a life in Maine that you can afford. A life of dignity and a government that actually serves its people. I want to thank our incredible campaign team and all 15,000 volunteers. You have built the most powerful grassroots movement in the history of this state. This is because of you. And when we finally defeat Susan Collins, that will be because of you too. You don't just believe in a different kind of politics. You have dedicated your time and your talents to it. It is a service to our state and to our nation, and thank you. I also want to thank Governor Janet Mills for a lifetime of service to a state that we both love. We are eternally grateful. And to any of those who feel let down or disappointed or disillusioned, it is my job to earn your trust, faith, and support. And I will spend every day of this campaign, and if I have the privilege, every day in the United States Senate doing exactly that. It is deeply humbling to stand here as your Democratic nominee. It is an honor, and I will not let you down. Until recently, I thought that harbor master would be the height of my political career. It now appears that things have changed. But it's funny, this morning was a normal one. I woke up in my home, just a few doors down from the house I grew up in. Amy and I shared a pot of coffee. We walked our dogs on the same road that I've spent most of my life on. We spent the afternoon knocking on doors and getting ready for this evening. And then we drove down here to Blue Hill, where I was born. Born in a maternity ward that has since closed. I am a son of rural Maine. I was a kid who picked blueberries under the July sun, and then one day, I was a kid who signed up and left to fight for his country. And when I returned, I carried with me the weight of forever wars and the struggle and the alienation that came with it. But I'm also a lucky one who found his way back, who found a living on the sea, and a home and a community that offered love and redemption. Redemption is not just some simple or easy destination. It's a journey. I've made mistakes in my life, mistakes that I regret, that I live with, and that I continue to learn from. And I'm still far from perfect. But every day, I wake up and I try to be a little bit better and a little bit kinder than I was the day before. And if you give me the chance, I will be a senator for the people who cannot afford to buy a senator. I will stand up for you and against billionaires and greedy corporations. I will serve you, the people of Maine, not some lobbyist or party boss. I will be the champion for your dreams as if it were my own, no matter the challenge or the expense. I will fight for you. I have been willing to die for my country. There is nothing that I will not do for the state of Maine. You have lifted me up. You have had my back. This is the state that raised me, and this is the state that saved me. Now, I am not a deeply religious man, and yet I cannot help but think tonight about a hymn. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Found because of the grace of the people of Maine. Grace comes when a tree falls and your neighbor brings over a chainsaw. Grace comes when your truck gives out late at night and someone you've never met stops to help you. Grace comes when you need it most and expect it least, when your parents need a hand and an old friend doesn't hesitate to go shovel the driveway. Or when a teacher, as underpaid as they are, stays late after school, gives up their own precious free time to help a kid who has fallen behind. Grace is not inevitable, but here in Maine, sometimes it feels like it is. And that is something I will never take for granted. It is a mighty gift, and one that I am committed to extending outwards. Maine, I love you. I love this state. Now the national pundits, the political establishment, they keep looking for that one story, that one headline, that one moment in my life that they can define the campaign by. But in trying so hard to understand me, they failed to understand that this is not about me at all. This is a movement about us. About the far too many working far too hard and struggling far too much at the hands of the ruling class. It is not a story of my hardship, it's of our hardship. A story of the hardship of every working Mainer. People that used to be able to stern in the summertime, plow in the winter, dig clams, and be able to send your kid off to college, but you can't anymore. Because that hard work, it isn't enough now. This story, the story of this campaign, it's not about how the political establishment counted me out. It's about for how far too long the political establishment has counted out the voices of every single person without the money to buy influence. But they don't know Maine. Those who think we can be fooled by a handful of billionaires, who think they can just buy elections like they buy yachts or other houses. But they don't know Maine. We will continue to show up for one another. We will be the people that fight for each other in the places that we love. We are ready for change. And they will try to make this race about everything other than what it absolutely is, a simple choice for who will represent us in the United States Senate. Susan Collins may have started her career decades ago in Washington with good intentions, but she has become just as spineless and corrupt as the establishment she now serves. She got elected promising to protect Roe versus Wade, only to turn around and put a justice of the Supreme Court who overturned it. She lied to us. Susan Collins has used her privilege and power to funnel $60 million in federal contracts, $60 million of our tax dollars, to her lobbyist husband. If that's not corruption, I don't know what is. Susan Collins has gotten 21 times wealthier just in the last 15 years. Has anybody else gotten 21 times wealthier since Susan Collins was elected to office? Does Maine have 21 times the schools and hospitals? No. We have less. Susan Collins is getting rich while we're getting screwed. The last time she ran for office, she received more money from private equity than any other member of Congress, including some of the same private equity companies that shuttered the mills here in Maine. And ever since then, she has stood by and done nothing while they have bought up nursing homes, local businesses, the last of the houses we could afford, stripped our communities for parts. Hell, they bought the Boston Red Sox. And Susan Collins has never met a war she didn't like. She's been supporting endless wars since I was a teenager, and I know I had to fight in 2 of them. Senator Collins, I got blown up while you handed out billions of dollars to defense companies that invest in you. Sorry, that you're invested in. You and your friends profited, and my friends died. Susan Collins has voted to send billions of our taxpayer dollars to fund other people's wars. Susan Collins, how do you justify closing hospitals in Maine while using our tax dollars to destroy them halfway around the world? If you reflect Maine's values, why are you funding masked agents who are ripping our neighbors off the streets, driving them off in unmarked vans? That is not the freedom that I served 4 tours defending. If you are an independent voice, why do you vote with Donald Trump 95% of the time? If you're so bipartisan, why were you the deciding vote to put Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court? The deciding vote to defund our health care and our hospitals. Why did you rubber stamp the greatest redistribution of wealth from the working class to the ruling class in the history of our nation? Susan Collins is only bipartisan when it doesn't matter. Susan Collins calls herself the gold standard of common sense. Common sense would be Mainers not having to choose between seeing a doctor or paying your mortgage. Common sense would be banning billionaires from buying elections. And it would also be giving workers the same seat at the table as CEOs. Common sense would be a minimum wage that's a living wage. It would be keeping our hospitals open and our schools funded and our kids from having to fight in another generation of forever wars. Common sense would be releasing the Epstein files. Should be unafraid of upsetting the wannabe king to whom Susan Collins bows. Susan Collins said she would only serve 2 terms. She's now running for her 6th. She has worked in politics longer than Joe Biden. She hasn't held a town hall since I was in 8th grade. I've held 83 town halls in the past 8 months. What are you trying to hide, Senator Collins? Now, the truth is, Susan Collins doesn't serve us. She serves Donald Trump. She serves the Epstein class. She serves her corporate donors and the corrupt political system that has rigged the economy against us. She does not serve us, and so we will defeat Susan Collins. We will take back this Senate seat. We will take back our power. And when we do, I want you to imagine what it will feel like when we hold Trump and his criminal enterprise to account. When we end prescription drug price gouging. When a trip to the grocery store, to the gas station, doesn't break the bank. When everyone who was born in Maine, raised in Maine, and who loves Maine can stay in Maine. When we codify Roe v. Wade. When we pass Medicare for all. But when we defend our democracy, our country, once we've defended our freedom, let it be a different kind of freedom. Not merely a romantic freedom, but a freedom that is real, that is material. The freedom to start a family, to raise your kids under a roof that is your own, with the promise of security and the guarantee of time. Time to build, time to create, time to love. The freedom to live lives not of struggle and scraping by, but of dignity and fulfillment. Maine, the eyes of the nation are upon us. And while they are here, please go to GrahamForSenate.com and make a donation, or sign up to be a volunteer. There's an old saying, as Maine goes, so goes the nation. If you want to stop war with Iran and end the forever wars, if you want to give workers the raise they deserve, seniors the security they worked for, you want to bring back Roe v. Wade, as Maine goes, so goes the nation. If you want to stop a Trump family slush fund, their ballroom, their deals with Saudi princes and tech oligarchs, if you want to stop the corruption, as Maine goes, so goes the nation. If we want to dismantle ICE, win back the Senate, check Donald Trump's power, and take back ours, as Maine goes, so goes the nation. Together, we will defeat Susan Collins. Together, we will win back this Senate seat.
You've been listening to Graham Plattner addressing supporters after clinching the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate in Maine. He'll now turn to his general election race against Susan Collins, and former Obama campaign manager Jim Messina is back with us. Okay, Jim Messina, there are a bunch of things that have struck me about this, and he's just wrapping up there. A bunch of things that struck me about what he just said. I mean, clearly this was the biggest audience he was going to have in Maine. It's also probably the biggest audience, perhaps nationally, he may have, as he's trying to reset after a series of allegations and stories over the last couple of weeks that didn't seem to impact so far the outcome of this race. I was struck. He started the speech basically by saying, if we can change our politics and our country, we can change personally. That's clearly a nod to the scandals of the last several weeks and even before that. And mistakes I made in my life, I continue to live with. He referenced later. He's not digging back into it. He's just relating, I think, attempting to the imperfections of people. But I think the best line, and then I want to hear what you thought, was a senator for the people who cannot afford to buy a senator. And if people were tuning in, I think that's a line a lot of people in this country relate to. But what did you think of that speech and where we sit right now?
Well, first of all, I thought that was a masterclass. I don't know if he wrote that or who wrote that, but that was really good. And the fact that he 1 year ago wasn't a politician, and then he delivers that in front of basically the entire country, I thought that was, you're seeing a Star is Born, and you're seeing how a guy who no one had heard of a year ago, even in Maine, no one had heard of him, just beat the incumbent governor in a primary. And so I thought it was amazing. I, too, thought the first 2 minutes of that speech was amazing when he said, if you believe we can change the system, then you got to believe that people can change. And I know people can change because I have. Relating it to that, I thought was perfect political theater, and it's true. And then coming back later saying, hey, this race isn't about me. This race is about us. As you remember, that was a very big Barack Obama line in 2008. He was the vehicle for people's hopes and dreams. And I think Plattner putting it not about himself and building it to about all of us, and then deliver the line you talked about. There's nothing that people get more mad about a broken political system, and they realize the deck is stacked against them, and they realize why the deck is stacked, because of money. And so that line I thought was a brilliant political move, and I think it's a guy who understood the moment he was in.
Yeah, Maine is still hard. Susan Collins is hard to beat. I'm always surprised more politicians don't remember this is about a cultural moment and movement and trying to bring people into a community with you. And that's what running for office is like. It's supposed to be, and you heard that from him tonight. Jim Messina, thanks for hanging with us through the show and through that speech as well. You're going to hang with us more. I'm sorry. We're going to take a very quick break. We're going to keep talking about election results. We'll be right back. Ellie Velshi is still the big board. Okay, Graham Plattner has just clinched the Democratic nomination for Senate in Maine. So let's go back to our friend Ali Velshi, who's at the big board. Ali, what can you tell us?
Just before you went to Graham Plattner's speech, we were getting the numbers in. We had 8% of the vote, and we now have 18%. We were able to show you that the AP had advanced Graham Plattner as the winner of the primary with 8% of the vote in. Now, why is that the case? It's because of the way Maine shapes out. All of this part of Maine, which is basically, this is all bordering Canada. It's very, very rural. We have votes in from every county except one, again, a very, very rural county. The population centers are all down here, and right before the call was made that Graham Plattner had won, we did not have vote in from Bangor, Augusta, and Portland, and it all came in all at the same time. Augusta just came in not too long ago, but you go to Bangor and you see he had 71% to Janet Mills, 18%. In Portland, 77.5% to Janet Mills, 18%. And in Augusta, which came in 67%, we thought Janet Mills would do better there than probably in any other county, and it looks like that's possible. She had about 22% there. In Graham Plattner's home county, where he was talking to us from, where he made a speech from in Hancock County, he's got a very healthy lead, 76%, but it's very, very small numbers in that county. So the bottom line is we were waiting for that to happen. It's very unusual to be able to call a race with 8% of the votes in, but it was so decisive. Useful to note, Janet Mills, who suspended her campaign. She did say in the last couple of weeks that she's still on the ballot, which she is, but she didn't make any meaningful effort to campaign. Coming out with, at this point, 19% of the vote, that's telling. It's not nothing for somebody who people knew wasn't really in the race. So a very interesting race. And then, of course, you heard Graham Plattner's entire speech in which he talked about sort of his redemption. He made references to having been lost and found by the people of Maine, and then leaning into that economic message and saying he's a senator for people who can't afford to buy a senator. It seems that for all of his troubles in the last several weeks, his economic message, for whatever reason, seems to have resonated with Maine voters.
Ali Velshi, what an interesting one to watch. I know you're still there. You're still tracking things. We're continuing our coverage. Thank you, as always, for being with us. We're back with former campaign manager for Barack Obama, Jim Messina, who's been hanging with me through the show here as things are developing. Early in his speech, Plattner said, "To those who feel let down or disappointed or disillusioned, it is my job to earn your trust, faith, and support." I thought, I mean, that is trying to send the message, I am humble. I know I have screwed up. I know that I have to earn your vote. What'd you make of that?
Yeah, I think it was really smart. He's assuming nothing. And, you know, as the main reporter you had on earlier said, I think exactly right. This race is going to be really, really close. And he just cannot afford a base that is not solid. And, you know, I think Ali's right. 20% of the vote for Janet Mills, who wasn't really running, shows that he still has some work to do. He still has a base to unite. He still has a party to unite in what's going to be the closest and most expensive Senate race in America. So I think him acknowledging it, I love the quick hymn that he talked about, that he was lost and now he's found. He's attempting to say, I know I've screwed this up, but it's about us, not me. And I think that's the key here. And he understands that he needs a united Democratic base. It'll be interesting to see, you know, what Janet Mills says tonight and tomorrow night, because I think that's going to be a very important moment to consolidate the Democrats going into the general election.
No question about it. We've seen that in Texas. It certainly is going to be important here. We'll see. I mean, she's still a pretty popular governor in Maine, too. So I think that's important for people to remember. So many interesting things to watch. These dynamics and what is happening in states that are very different from what people inside, you know, cushioned rooms in Washington, D.C. are projecting is what makes politics so fascinating sometimes. And this is certainly one of the more fascinating races to watch. Jim Messina, I always enjoy talking to you. Thank you for bringing us through the course of this evening, as always. And I'm sure we're going to be talking to you again many times in the future about political races. So thank you again.
I hope so. Thanks, Jen.
All right. Thank you so much. Okay, that's going to do it for me tonight. There's still ongoing coverage, of course, of the politics of this evening. The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell starts right now. Hey, Lawrence.
Hey, Jen, we're going to go to Ali Velshi and get some of the latest news in the election results. And it's not just Maine tonight. There's a lot out there.
Certainly not.
We're going to get right to it.
Sounds good. Have a great show.
Thanks, Jen. Well, 19,812 people were in Madison Square Garden last night to watch the most exciting basketball game played in that arena in the 21st century. And only one of those people fell asleep. And possibly because Donald Trump seemed to be sleeping on live TV, Iran decided that last night, while Donald Trump was attending that basketball game, it would be a good time to shoot down a U.S. Army Apache helicopter. We will get to all of that and more in a moment, but first, let's check in with Ali Velshi on tonight's election results. Ali, what's the latest? I guess we don't have Ali Velshi. We thought we had him. We might get him at some other point in the program. I want to turn also to Donald Trump's trouble with judges and now trouble with grand juries. This is a transcript from a Chicago grand jury in which the grand jury was repeatedly refusing to indict protesters who the Trump prosecutors were trying to accuse of being in a criminal conspiracy in their protests against Donald Trump's ICE invasion forces in Chicago. This is directly from the grand jury transcript. It is rare for us to have a grand jury transcript, but because of the strange procedures in this case, this grand jury transcript has been released. And here it is. Grand juror, are you actually presenting any new actual facts or just a different viewpoint on your side? Ms. Mecklenburg is the prosecutor. Ms. Mecklenburg says, okay, I'm feeling the skepticism already. Are you going to be able to listen with an open mind? Tell the truth. The grand juror said, I know. To which prosecutor Mecklenburg said, okay, then you have to go. The grand juror said, I heard this case like last week, and I thought it was a crock of crap. I'm going to clean it up to crock of crap then, and I think it still is. Okay, thank you for your opinion. So that is what grand juries have been doing to Donald Trump's prosecutors around the country as they bring their ludicrous cases. It's not just federal judges who have also been ruling against Donald Trump. Iran and the rest of the world have known for days that Donald Trump was scheduled to go to last night's basketball game. And so, possibly as a way of highlighting to Americans just how not on the job Donald Trump is during the war that Donald Trump started, Iran chose last night to shoot down a U.S. Army Apache helicopter. The two crew members were quickly rescued in high-tech fashion by an extraordinarily effective Navy seagoing drone, a 24-foot high-speed vessel that rushed to that rescue. It was the first such rescue accomplished by this new Navy asset, which allows such rescue missions now to be conducted without any risk to a crew of a rescue vessel, which is very good news indeed to everyone in the Navy and families of everyone serving in the United States Navy. The United States conducted retaliatory strikes today in response to the attack on the Army helicopter last night. The New York Times reports, quote, 2 Iranian officials said that the airstrikes had targeted military bases and other installations, including artillery batteries. And the Trump administration issued a carefully phrased description of the retaliation, calling it, quote, a proportional response. A proportional response is what every president prior to Donald Trump used in such situations. Presidents were always very careful to avoid shooting wars whenever possible by choosing what the American military and the White House and diplomats have been calling, quote, a proportional response since the Vietnam War. It is a standard term of diplomatic art, exactly the kind of language you do not expect to hear from Donald Trump or anyone in his Department of Defense, which Donald Trump illegally calls a Department of War. Donald Trump is also the only president in history who has publicly threatened not only a disproportionate response, but actual war crimes by saying he would completely wipe out Iran if Iran did not reach a peace agreement with him within a couple of days. And those statements were, of course, several weeks ago. The couple of days never happened. The fact that Donald Trump obviously did not mean a word when he said all those threats about his self-imposed deadline for committing his threatened war crimes means that no one believes any of Donald Trump's deadlines, including his new one, 2 or 3 days. That's his new one. And the reason not to believe Donald Trump's new one is that Donald Trump himself retracted it right after he said it last night after the Knicks game before boarding Air Force One.
We're in the finals of what will be a very, very good deal that will not allow in any way, shape, or form nuclear weapons, etc. And that its strait will open up right away. It'll open up immediately upon signing, which could be in 2 or 3 days.
You'll be signing a peace agreement?
No, we have a good chance of doing it. We should be able to do it in 1 hour, if you want to know the truth.
Here's a phrase I've never used. If you want to know the truth. I've also never said to tell you the truth. To tell you the truth is a very common phrase. It's actually a reflex a lot of people use. I just never have. If you want to know the truth is actually a stranger phrase, because who wouldn't? They are reflexive phrases for Donald Trump. He doesn't think about them. He doesn't think about what they mean. And in my own experience, and this is only my own experience, this is not social science, people who say to tell the truth, or the weirder version, if you want to know the truth, are frequently optional employers of the truth. You can search presidential press conferences and never find the phrase, if you want to know the truth, because the implication is the person saying that doesn't always tell the truth. It's one of Donald Trump's tics, if you want to know the truth. And every single time I have ever heard that man use that phrase, if you want to know the truth, he said it after a lie. We should be able to do it in 1 hour if you want to know the truth. We should be able to reach a complex peace agreement with Iran that would prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons in 1 hour. The same person said in his interview last weekend with Meet the Press that this kind of negotiation takes years. That was Donald Trump's defense on Meet the Press for not having already negotiated a peace agreement. He said, quote, "It takes years to do these things." And so, yes, we want to know the truth, and we all know it's impossible to get that from Donald Trump about anything. And so Donald Trump says that it could be in 2 or 3 days. Those are his exact words. It could be in 2 or 3 days. A reporter simply repeats those words back to him. You'll be signing a peace agreement in 2 or 3 days. And Donald Trump immediately says, no, no. That's what we're dealing with. In the presidency, during wartime, that's what Iran is watching every day. That's the clown on the other side of the negotiations that Iran might or might not be engaging in with the United States. At 6:30 p.m. tonight, the Iranian dictatorship, which has never dealt with a more clownish person anywhere in the world than Donald Trump, issued this statement. Quote, "Despite its defeats on the battlefield, the U.S. opted to test our determination. Our powerful armed forces will leave no attack or threat unanswered. Leave our region if you want to be safe. History of the Persian Gulf has many chapters on dire fates of intruding outsiders." Nothing in the Iranian statement about 2 or 3 days. And so we've reached this extraordinary point in history. In a war Donald Trump started with Iran's dictatorship 102 days ago, Donald Trump has lied repeatedly every single time he has been asked when his war will end. And Iran has not lied once about when the war will end. And the Iranian regime is a horrible, murderous dictatorship. But Donald Trump has publicly lied more about his war with Iran than Iran has. The Democratic leader of the United States Senate, New York Senator Chuck Schumer, a lifetime born in Brooklyn Knicks fan, who was not able to go to the game last night because he has an important job in Washington, said, quote, "American soldiers were shot down in Iran as Trump was wasting taxpayer dollars to fall asleep while watching the Knicks. Each day his illegal war drags on further exposes this president's recklessness." And presidential candidate James David Vance has decided that his presidential campaign will not be able to survive the same level of public lying on the record, on video, that Donald Trump does every day. And so in an interview with CBS today, J.D. Vance became the first vice president in history to publicly disagree with his president about when a peace deal could be achieved in a war that they are fighting.
I think that the deal could happen in the next week, but the deal could also happen months from now.
So J.D. Vance heard Donald Trump say 2 or 3 days last night. He knows that. And J.D. Vance refused to repeat Donald Trump's words today. And instead, Republican presidential candidate J.D. Vance stretched Donald Trump's 2 or 3 days to could happen in the next week, and immediately added a completely indefinite, open-ended timetable so that he can claim he never said when it would happen. J.D. Vance knows that he is creating sound bites to be used against him in his own presidential campaign, and that's why he said, quote, I think that the deal could happen in the next week, but the deal could also happen months from now. J.D. Vance just covered himself for any deal that happens or doesn't happen anytime for the rest of this year. And while he was at it, J.D. Vance avoided saying, if you want to know the truth. Leading off our discussion tonight is Congressman Adam Smith of the state of Washington. He is the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman Smith, I know you have wanted to know the truth about things like, for example, how much does this war cost? How much of the truth do we know about this war tonight?
Not a lot. And look, all of the president's obfuscations and continual claims that a peace deal is at hand really obscures the basic reality of what's going on here. Trump stupidly started this war thinking that a 2, 3, 4-week bombing campaign would break the Iranian regime, that they would come begging for a deal and give us all of our terms. That didn't happen. Iran had an asymmetric advantage. All they had to do was survive and be able to inflict pain on the region, which they did. Ever since that moment, Trump has been stuck. He comes out, gosh, every other day now saying, oh, we got a deal, it's tomorrow, it's next week, it's whatever. Please understand, there is no deal on the horizon. Iran's position right now is pay us to open the strait. That's it. They're not talking about nukes, they're not talking about terrorism, they're not talking about ballistic missiles. Trump is ignoring all of that. So please understand where we're at. We're stuck. The cost continues to go up, certainly the economic cost, as we see the price of gas and other commodities skyrocketing because of this war. And as you did a great job of explaining, Trump has no idea how to bring this to an end or no idea where he is actually going.
I do want to focus on this rescue, using this Navy drone, seagoing drone, because this is a breakthrough technology for a situation like that. And I know when you're on the Armed Services Committee, you're always being presented with these projects and these possible new assets that the military wants, and some of them can be questionable and some of them might look very promising. What was your reaction to that successful deployment of that rescue seagoing drone?
Yeah, it's really cool. I actually know the company. I've visited the company a couple times and made it. I saw that very thing being made off the assembly line down in Austin. And they've got that version of it. They've got a bigger version of it. This is a real opportunity for us to more cost effectively meet our defense needs. And again, not to keep coming back to criticizing Trump. Trump's talking about building a $22 billion battleship that has highly questionable utility when we have these small autonomous systems, and I forget exactly how much they cost, but really, really cheap and really, really effective. That's the future. That's how we can meet our national security needs, even in our tight budget environment, without blowing up to a $1.6 trillion defense budget. We've got cheaper missiles. We've got cheaper drones. We've got cheaper missile defense, cheaper drone defense, cheaper autonomous naval vessels. Companies out there are making investments, developing incredible technology. So it's exciting to see that part of it. Not as exciting that we're in this war and the helicopter got shot down, but at least we are demonstrating new and innovative and I think really important capabilities.
Congressman Adam Smith, thank you very much for starting off our coverage tonight.
Thanks, Lance.
Thank you. And coming up today, the House Oversight Committee interviewed a witness who directly connected Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein. That's next. Maine is not the only state counting votes tonight. Ali Velshi, what else is happening?
Lots of states, things that are going on. We got a lot of developments out of California that you know about, but I want to talk to you about South Carolina for a second. For the Senate Democratic primary, which is not something most people will be thinking about, Annie Andrews was declared the winner of that pretty early in the night. In fact, earlier. So we called the Democratic Senate primary candidate earlier than we were able to call the Republican Senate candidate, which is wild because the Republican Senate candidate is Lindsey Graham, the incumbent who is sort of stuck to Donald Trump. It's not quite sure what he's done to get on the wrong side of this thing, but he faced a challenger from his right who got 28% of the vote. Lindsey Graham at this point was 78% of the vote in, only got 57.5% of the vote there. This is just an interesting story. Do with it what you will. Let's take a look at the gubernatorial primary as well in South Carolina on the Republican side. The winner here was 79% in. It's a runoff state, so you have to get more than 50%. Nobody got that because there are a lot of candidates. But the winner is Pamela Yvette. Pamela Yvette is the lieutenant governor. She got the Donald Trump stamp of approval. She's advancing with 29% of the vote. Alan Wilson is advancing with 26% of the vote. And you may be saying to yourself, who's Alan Wilson? Well, there are actually a couple of other interesting candidates, including Ralph Norman, who is a Republican congressman from the northern part of South Carolina. And look at that, not in fourth place, in fifth place, Nancy Mace with 11.8% of the vote. Nancy Mace largely, in fact, she claims to be the most MAGA candidate in the race, someone who is otherwise generally on Trump's side, fell out with Donald Trump over one particular major issue, the Epstein files, and she's not even making it into the top 5 in this race.
And Allie, we're going to get to the Epstein files right now in our coverage.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Allie. Well, today, the House Oversight Committee heard testimony from a witness who connected Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein literally.
Has President Trump come up at all?
His name has come up, yeah.
Did she talk about scheduling meetings between Mr. Epstein and President Trump?
Basically, arranging phone calls, I believe, was most of it. Just contact between, just arranging phone calls between President Trump and Mr. Epstein, yes.
Did she give a timeline on when they were talking?
I believe she referred to a time before Mr. Trump was president, that she did arrange for multiple phone calls between the two of them.
Today's witness, Leslie Groff, worked for Jeffrey Epstein for 18 years, beginning in 2001, a year after Leslie Groff started connecting phone calls between Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. Donald Trump told New York Magazine, quote, "I've known Jeff for 15 years, terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." In her written opening statement that she released publicly, Leslie Groff said, "I want to say without any doubt that I have come to believe the man who employed me from February of 2001 through July of 2019 was a monster. For 18 years, I worked for Dr. Jekyll, but was never permitted to see the true Mr. Hyde. Mr. Epstein was, in hindsight, a master manipulator and deceiver who separated his legitimate life from his secret life as an abuser and made sure that as his secretary, those two worlds did not collide. He had every reason not to tell me about his crimes. He had no leverage on me." Boston Congressman Stephen Lynch, who was in the room today, said this.
It is highly inconsistent what she's maintaining, that she really didn't know Jeffrey Epstein, even though she worked for him for 18 years. As well, she seemed to be very vague in her description about what Mr. Epstein was charged with when she went to work for him, shortly after she went to work for him. He was a registered sex offender, and she arranged young women for massages with a registered sex offender. And I just question whether she can rightfully and truthfully maintain that she saw nothing improper in that. He was a registered sex offender and had to report. He had restrictions on his travel, who he had contact with. And he had to report his whereabouts to the court at a time when she was arranging massages for by those young women. And that does not sit well with her testimony.
And Congressman Lynch added more about the scheduling of those massages.
She scheduled, well, he would give her a name and numbers. She would schedule the massages.
Did she know about ages of maybe women who are under 18?
That's what there's a point of contention on that. There are young women who say she knew, and that they told her that she was underage. And then she maintains that she was not fully aware of that. However, there has been some litigation around that point. I won't, I can't speak to that, but certainly there have been allegations that that was the case.
Just to be clear, she's testified today that she knew she was booking massages for...
Oh yeah, she said she would get a slip, with a number and a name from Mr. Epstein, and she would arrange the massages.
Joining us now is Democratic Congressman James Walkinshaw of Virginia. He's a member of the House Oversight Committee and the House Homeland Security Committee. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us tonight. There seems to be a real credibility issue with this witness claiming not to be aware of the dark side of Jeffrey Epstein's life.
Yeah, look, I honestly don't know how any reasonable person could believe what she was saying today. She's his assistant for 18 years before and after he pleads guilty to a sex crime with a minor. She arranges massage after massage after massage, all performed by young women, by the way. And the idea that she had no knowledge of the abuse and the crimes that he was committing, I just don't think is remotely credible.
Was she saying that she actually never saw any of these teenage girls?
She did assert that most of those performing the massages she did not meet in person. We do know from the files that she received pictures of many of them via email as they were being evaluated by Mr. Epstein. So she certainly did see some of them.
Now, this is one of those interviews that they're being called interviews because apparently the witness was not put under oath. What is the point of that?
That's right. It's a transcribed interview. So while it's a crime to lie to Congress under any circumstance, she wasn't sworn in before the interview took place. And I think most importantly, from my perspective, from the perspective of Democrats on the committee, it was behind closed doors and the American people weren't able to see it, which has been a problem throughout this investigation. I think further erodes the trust that the American people have in this Republican-led investigation.
Congressman James Walkinshaw, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
And coming up, another federal judge has stopped another Trump illegal and unconstitutional tax. Yes, a tax. Remember when the Republicans were the anti-tax party? Donald Trump ended all that. That's next. An unlawful tax. That is what Donald Trump has been imposing until a federal judge in Boston stopped him yesterday. Remember when the Republican Party was the anti-tax party? Remember when every Republican member of Congress signed a pledge, they actually signed it, to never raise taxes. And now the Republican Party who signed that completely support Donald Trump illegally raising taxes through illegal tariffs that have now been refunded and through a $100,000 tax that they call a fee for employers to obtain visas for highly skilled workers like doctors, scientists, and tech wizards. Yesterday, federal judge Leo Sorokin in Boston said that Donald Trump's $100,000 fee on H-1B visa applications is another illegal and unconstitutional Trump Republican tax. The judge wrote, the substance and application of the $100,000 payment reveal that it is a tax, regardless of what the payment is called. The judge said exactly what the United States Supreme Court said in the tariff case, which is the power to tax belongs exclusively to Congress, according to the Constitution. Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell, who brought the successful case to block that Trump tax, said, today's victory protects the integrity of the H-1B visa program as a tool to address severe labor shortages in vital industries like education, healthcare, and medical research. In Massachusetts, this win will ensure that we can fill critical vacancies and hire world-class faculty and researchers at colleges and universities across the Commonwealth. And today, a federal judge in New York City presiding in the Court of International Trade said the time has come to ensure all of the duties are refunded. Those are his exact words. Judge Richard Eaton is presiding over the refunds of Donald Trump's illegal and unconstitutional tariffs. In a hearing today on the progress of those refunds, a Customs and Border Protection official estimated that they will have approved refunds of over $100 billion by the end of this month. And the only reason that is happening is that Judge Eaton has repeatedly ordered the Trump administration to fast-track the refund process, something Judge Eaton continues to actively police, much to Donald Trump's horror and confusion.
Sir, a federal judge today struck down the $100,000 fee for the H-1B visa, saying you need congressional approval. Are you going to push for Congress to do this?
These federal judges are really giving us a hard time. It's really crazy what's going on with the court system. They are giving us a very, very hard time, and they shouldn't be doing it. They're hurting our country very badly.
Joining us now is Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania. He's the top Democrat on the House Budget Committee and a member of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over both taxes and tariffs. Congressman, as we know, it's actually written into the Constitution itself. Donald Trump would not know this, that your committee, the Ways and Means Committee, is the only place where tax legislation can be written. It must originate there before then moving to the Senate.
That's exactly right, Lawrence. It's right there in black and white in Article 1. And I'm very gratified that the U.S. Supreme Court, as well as these other lower-level courts, have all ruled against this president. The reality is his tariffs are taxes, and in fact, they are now the highest rate of tariff since the Great Depression. This represents almost an extra $2,000 the average American family has paid per year because of Trump's tariff taxes. So I'm doing everything I can to make sure this president follows the law and returns this money that he illegally took from the American people.
And Judge Eaton has had to drag Trump officials into court and force them to do what his order already requires them to do and what the Supreme Court decision in this requires them to do.
That's right. And, you know, the scenario that I think a lot of us have always been most concerned about is what would happen if this president just ignored a court decision, including ignoring a Supreme Court decision. He has not, on the face of it, gone that far, at least yet, but this is disturbing the way he keeps ignoring these court decisions and is really being dragged kicking and screaming into doing the right thing, giving the American people their money back.
And not a single Republican in Congress really rising up against the Trump taxes.
No, of course not. They wouldn't dare violate the sacred words of their dear leader. But it's really amazing for anyone who has a memory of the Republican Party over the last 3, 4, 5 decades. I mean, remember George W. Bush running for president saying, "It's your money, I want to give it back to you." Ronald Reagan talking about tariffs being a massive tax on the American people. All of that orthodoxy has been completely turned on its head, and every single Republican who knows better and used to say those things is, of course, going along with what Donald Trump now says.
Yeah, Republicans were as anti-tariff as they were allegedly anti-tax, and then Donald Trump came along. Congressman Brendan Boyle, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And up next, Jacob Soboroff will join us with a new report on the record number of babies, yes, babies, that Donald Trump is holding in federal custody. That's next with Jacob Soboroff. Important new reporting from MS Now and the Marshall Project is exposing how many babies are being held behind bars by Donald Trump's Department of Homeland Security. Quote, since the Trump administration entered the White House last year, at least 500 babies and toddlers have spent some of that pivotal time in the custody of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. ICE has dramatically increased detentions of children aged 3 and under, holding 25 of them in custody on an average day between January 2025 and March of this year, according to a new analysis by the Marshall Project and MS Now of records obtained by the Deportation Data Project, a group of academics and lawyers who collect and share federal immigration data. That number is 10 times higher than it was in the previous 12 months under former President Joe Biden. Back then, on an average day, fewer than 3 babies and toddlers were held at facilities across the country. Parents in ICE detention have complained of substandard conditions that frequently left their young children sick, isolated, and regressing in their physical and intellectual development. Our next guest, MS Now's Jacob Soboroff, talked with 2 parents who came to the United States from Russia with their young son. They were seeking asylum to avoid prosecution because of their opposition to the war in Ukraine. Upon arriving in the United States, the family was sent to the ICE detention facility in Dilley, Texas. This is what they had to say.
You left Russia because you didn't want to go to prison, yet you get to the United States of America and you end up in a place that to you feels like a prison. What was that like for you?
We came here to escape prison. We wanted to be free. But once we arrived in America, we spent 4 months in detention.
4 months in detention.
118 days, to be exact.
Gotcha! It's crazy to hold your son like this and look at this beautiful child in the face and think that for 118 days, the 3 of you were locked up in a prison for families in the United States. I cannot imagine what it was like for you.
It was very hard not knowing when they would let us go, where we would go, or if they were going to deport us.
MS Now and the Marshall Project asked the Department of Homeland Security about these allegations, but the agency declined to answer specific questions after we refused to provide identifying information about our sources. DHS and ICE spokespersons did, however, provide statements dismissing the broader claims against Dilley as, quote, media lies, and saying conditions are, quote, safe, humane, and family-friendly. Joining us now is Jacob Soboroff, MS Now's senior political and national reporter. He is the host of the new show Connect with Jacob Soboroff, which is premiering this Saturday on this network. Jacob, just a shocking situation that this administration is pushing up that number of babies and children. And there is some amount of this that is an understandable product of these kinds of detentions, but every other presidency has tried to keep that number as small as possible.
Not only that, Lawrence, but during the Biden administration, the Dilley ICE family prison, and just let me say that one more time, a family prison in the United States of America for immigrants, was shut down entirely. It was closed. This administration reopened it for the sole purpose of detaining families and children. And now, according to this new data in this reporting that we have done with the Marshall Project, this is the first reporting partnership that we at MS Now and the Marshall Project have done. We have learned that 500 children under the age of 3 have been detained through March. So it could be more kids since March, since the beginning of the second Trump term. And what does that mean? It means lifelong trauma for these children. It means these children being held in conditions that all of these families that we have talked to have said no adequate food, bedding was difficult, couldn't get the type of baby formula that they wanted, clean water for the children. Amir and Azat and this entire family, Al-Su, came here because they were fleeing persecution in Russia. And then they only ended up in the same type of prison in the United States of America that they thought they were avoiding in Russia when they opposed the war in Ukraine.
Were they, did they have the news of what Donald Trump was doing here available to them as they were coming to this country? How surprised were they about this?
What they understood was that once they came into the United States, they might be detained as they crossed the border to seek asylum. But under the landmark Flores Settlement Agreement from the 1990s, they should not be held there without their with their children, for more than 20 days. Many children during the Trump administration have been held well beyond the 20-day limit. And in fact, this family was held for 118 days with their little boy. Amir, could only say the words mom and dad by the time he left there, had such an incredible regression in his development, the parents were worried that the child would never speak like a normal child again. And when I went to visit them in Sacramento, where they are renting a single room in someone else's house, it's the only place they can afford at this point, he started to show great progress. But these kids forever will be living with this. During family separation, we knew that this was, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, government-sanctioned child abuse. That's what they said. And this is the next logical extension of that.
Jacob Soboroff, just invaluable reporting. We're going to take a break here. When we come back, I want to get the latest update on the California election, where we do have some news there tonight. We're going to be right back with Jacob Soboroff. Jacob Soboroff is back with us, and I think we have the latest numbers in the California governor's race. I think we have them on screen. Yeah, there they are. And we now see the Republican candidate, Steve Hilton, has been designated the finisher there at the number 2 spot, 88% of the vote in. It is going to be the Democrat versus the Republican in November. And Jacob, you're reporting last night from the voting center in Los Angeles, where they have all these glass walls built in anticipation of Donald Trump lying about the transparency of the way they count votes there. You had this great idea to say to Donald Trump, come on out here and walk around this place the way I do, because he could walk through it tomorrow, as his federal prosecutors already have, and found nothing wrong.
It is unbelievable to be in that facility and to hear from the local election officials in the largest election jurisdiction in the country, which is the main reason why we count votes particularly
More votes
slowly.
counted there than any other counting place in America.
More than 41 states. More votes than 41 states in the union in Los Angeles County.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump is puzzled by why it takes a long time to count votes fairly and accurately. And these U.S. attorneys show up there and they say they're doing an investigation. They're not doing an investigation into anything. They're standing in the same public viewing area that I was standing in, or that you could go stand in, or anyone in this studio or anyone in Southern California could go walk in and watch as an election observer.
And all the U.S. attorney has done so far, actually, to his credit, is to completely eliminate a rumor that was out there that Spencer Pratt in one of the vote count updates got 0 votes, which would have been impossible. And he said, Donald Trump's U.S. attorney said, no, that's never happened. That didn't happen. That's false. So it isn't going well for Trump on the investigation. But have you figured out why, if the Democrats have rigged the California election, they rigged it so that the Republican would be on the ballot in November? Because I'm struggling with that.
It is unbelievable. To hear the conspiracy theories, what I witnessed was not a conspiracy. It was bureaucracy or democracy in action. And the reason that Spencer Pratt lost the mayoral election is because Democrats outnumber Republicans to an extraordinary degree in the city of Los Angeles. The reason Steve Hilton ultimately is not going to win the election in the general election is because Democrats outnumber Republicans to an extraordinary degree in the state of California. That is about it. We have a system that was pioneered, actually, vote centers in LA by a Republican county clerk in Larimer County, Colorado, Scott Doyle, in 2003. And that was exported to all these other jurisdictions throughout the country. Vote by mail and universal vote by mail was supported by Republican and Democratic election administrators for years before California adopted it. And I continue to hear from people on social media and the president and all these other conspiracy theorists that this is a democratic system enacted to benefit Democrats. That's not true. What is true is that there are more Democrats than Republicans in California and Los Angeles.
The network, of course, has an official process for calling elections, which I fully respect. However, in my unofficial process, the day after Election Day in California, I called the mayor's race in November for the Democrat.
Yes.
Whoever that, and Karen Bass was then going to be clearly the Democrat, and possibly, and now we're going to have 2 Democrats, so It's easy to call it for the Democrat. And it's impossible not to call the governor's race for the Democrat. The unofficial call on this program right now for November is, Javier Becerra is going to be the next governor of California. But, the national news media will spend some amount of time chasing Donald Trump's fake dreams that there's some possibility of the Republican getting somewhere in a state that is overwhelmingly Democratic. The Democrats don't spend a lot of time claiming that the Democrat is going to win in the Alabama governor's race. They don't spend a lot of time on that.
In Los Angeles, the idea that you have two Democrats now, Nithya Raman, the city council person of Progressive, and Karen Bass, the longtime congresswoman who's been the mayor now for almost 4 years, going up against each other is entirely plausible and probably what most people thought was going to happen. And the idea that Spencer Pratt even emerged in the conversation is largely based on social media and people from outside LA lifting him up in order to get him into the conversation. This is the outcome that most likely was going to happen, and sure enough, it did.
Jacob Soboroff, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We'll be watching Jacob's Connect with Jacob Soboroff premiering this Saturday at 10 a.m. right here on this network. That is tonight's last word. The 11th hour starts now.
Tonight, the latest from primary races around the country. In Maine's Senate race, the stage is set for Democrat Graham Plattner to face Republican Susan Collins in November. In California's governor's race, former Fox News host Steve Hilton advances to the general election to face Democrat Javier Becerra. Then a dangerous escalation threatens the ceasefire with Iran. The U.S. launches new strikes after Iranian forces shoot down an Army helicopter. All as the 11th hour gets underway on this Tuesday night. Greetings, I'm Simone Sanders Townsend, in for Stephanie Ruhle. We are tracking two big stories tonight. Primary results in 4 states, as well as the escalating situation in the Middle East. First, the primaries. Voters went to the polls in South Carolina, North Dakota, Nevada, and Maine, where embattled Democratic Senate candidate Graham Plattner won the nomination handily. He spoke to voters after winning the nomination.
I've made mistakes in my life, mistakes that I regret, that I live with, and that I continue to learn from. And I'm still far from perfect. No matter the challenge or the expense, I will fight for you. I have been willing to die for my country. There is nothing that I will not do for the state of Maine.
Plattner will face incumbent Senator Susan Collins in the general election. Flipping her seat is central to the Democrats' strategy to take back the Senate. Within the last 2 weeks, as early voting was underway in Maine, damaging reports have emerged about Plattner. First, the Wall Street Journal reported that Plattner's wife had warned his campaign about sexually explicit text messages he sent to other women early in their marriage. Then, the New York Times spoke with several women Plattner dated, some alleging his volatile and unsettling behavior, which he denies. There's also news, though, in the race to be California's next governor. Republican and former Fox News host Steve Hilton has advanced to the general election and will face Democrat Javier Becerra in November. Meanwhile, the Pentagon's Central Command confirms U.S. forces began self-defense strikes against Iran at the direction of the commander-in-chief after an Army helicopter went down off the coast of Oman. The Associated Press reports it collided with an Iranian drone. Both service members were rescued and are in stable condition, according to CENTCOM. There's a lot going on tonight, folks. But first, we want to bring in Ali Velshi, who is the chief data correspondent here at MS Now, and soon to be the host of the 11th hour. We are very excited about that, Ali. First, tell us, okay, let's start with the Senate race in Maine, for one. Give us your thoughts.
Well, first of all, we got 45% of the vote in. The Associated Press called this race with 8% of the vote in, which is very, very unusual. That's, as you know, it's not typical to see that, but we started to see these numbers come in, and they've largely stayed the same percentage-wise. Graham Plattner maintaining about 70% of the vote versus Janet Mills at about 20% of the vote. But what happened is that right around 9 p.m., we got votes from Bangor and Portland. You can see in Penobscot County, Graham Plattner, same thing, 72% to 18%. In Portland, 72% to 21% for Janet Mills. And then Augusta came in where we were expecting Janet Mills to do a little bit better, 70% to 20.5. So at that point, you're able to see the shape of how this state was going to go. I will say it was interesting because Janet Mills sort of ran out of money, stepped out of the race, but didn't remove her name from the ballot, and then made a point of telling people in the last week or so that, remember, I'm still on the ballot. It's a pretty strong performance for somebody who wasn't really running, but there as a secondary figure. Let's look at the Democratic primary for governor. This is interesting. 45% of the race in. No one has won just yet. Maine is one of those states where if you don't get 50%, it'll go to a ranked. It becomes a ranked voting situation. So we're not going to get a result on this night because, as you can see, nobody's getting 50%. Pretty close though. 26.6% for Nirav Shah, who was in the lead earlier and then dropped below. Troy Jackson, Hannah Pingree, Angus King the third, Angus King's son, Senator Angus King's son. So we're looking at that in Maine. All around a big night in Maine and a big night for Graham Plattner very earlier than we would have even expected.
You know, Allie, can we also talk about the California's governor's race? I was very struck by the fact that yesterday, while I was on air for the weeknight, it was reported that Steve Hilton was planning today to hold a press conference about the quote-unquote slow balloting that happens. I'm using air quotes for the folks listening at home, that happens in California. Well, that primary was exactly a week ago, and tonight we now know who will be on the ballot in November. Yep. But spoiler alert, it is Steve Hilton.
It is Steve Hilton.
One of the folks. Tell us more about this race.
91% of the vote in. Steve Hilton coming in with 25%. Javier Becerra, obviously, the night of the primary, we were able to advance him to the race. So it'll be Becerra versus Hilton. Tom Steyer trying to, make up the difference, but it wasn't going to happen. We got big vote drops from a few places, including Sacramento County with 93% of the vote in. Again, Steve Hilton did very well there. Los Angeles County almost completely counted. Tom Steyer did well there, but not enough to overcome the statewide pressure from Hilton. So in the end, and I think you addressed this earlier this evening, it's nonsensical. You and I were together with all of our colleagues on Tuesday where we explained something that every California voter knows. California voting is complicated. They make it easy because everybody gets sent a ballot and you can put it in a ballot box, you can mail it, or you can go in person. They make it easy to vote, but it's a bit of a PhD in learning all the topics and all the candidates, and you have to study it and you have to learn it, and it takes a long time to get counted. That's entirely normal. It's not a bug. It's a feature of the system. So Steve Hilton leaning into this nonsense that Donald Trump is on about there must be something wrong. How come the votes keep changing? I think he got a hint that he was, the votes were going his way, but you otherwise would have seen more out of Steve Hilton. It's a completely nonsensical race. I want to tell you about the primaries in South Carolina today as well. This is an interesting story. The gubernatorial primary, Pamela Yvette, the lieutenant governor endorsed by Trump, will go to the runoff along with Alan Wilson. Here's the interesting thing about South Carolina. Ralph Norman, sitting congressman, didn't make it into the primary. And look who's in fifth place, Nancy Mace with 12.3%. I mean, she pretty much supports, she claims she's the MAGA-iest person in the race. She of course fell out with Donald Trump over the Epstein files, and that has cost her heavily tonight.
You never know how it's going to go until election night. Allie, thank you so much for your time. Good to see you, and I'll be watching for you next week.
Thank you, my friend.
With that, folks, let's bring in our leadoff panel. Kevin Fry is an MS Now congressional reporter. Sam Stein is here. He is the managing editor for The Bulwark and MS Now political contributor. And Dave Weigel came onto set, Sam, okay, so he's giving you a run for your money. Dave is the political reporter for Semaphore. Kevin has an excuse because he is in Maine tonight. That is why he is not with us. We're going to start with Kevin. Kevin, a year ago, folks did not know who Graham Plattner was. I am interested in what the reaction has been there to his win, given these controversies around him, and frankly, a very fiery speech tonight that we're going to get into.
Yeah, I mean, look, the supporters here, I mean, given the fact that they came out, decided to spend their evening here at this rally, of course, are pretty on fire about what they heard tonight. They love this populist message. They think that he is kind of an authentic individual that feels relatable. He's not part of the Washington establishment. He's going to take on the system in their view. But as you talk to folks, including folks that have been volunteers on the campaign that I met here this evening, they also are willing to say that, yes, the last week and a half of these stories has caused them a bit of angst about where this campaign is going. Some of them will say, and have said, that, look, at the end of the day, they know a contest against Susan Collins is going to be complicated, no matter who the candidate is. But these last weeks of stories have, of course, kind of taken a little wind out of the sails. But speaking here tonight, of course, he did rev up the crowd with this message that he has been honing over this time, and his team viewed this as a chance to reset where things are in this conversation. And so you saw him very clearly outline a contrast between him and Susan Collins. They see this as a chance to finally put her out of the Senate, and they view the fact that Roe v. Wade has been overturned in the 6 years since the last time she was reelected as one of the potential ways to pry away voters. In fact, I was talking to one female voter here this evening about what she would say to some of those Mills voters. Janet Mills, of course, the governor here, some have viewed her voting for her as kind of a protest vote, a way to send a message to Plattner and to the party that they're not fully satisfied with his candidacy. What would she say to those individuals? And she basically said, yes, Plattner has some problems when it comes to his past involving women, but he's going to be the one that fights for abortion rights. He's going to be the one that stands up for those, whereas Collins has failed. That is the sort of message that they are hoping that Plattner can now establish heading into the actual general election.
Dave, can we talk a little bit about what we heard from Plattner tonight, specifically as it relates to Senator Susan Collins, really setting up the contrast I was struck by? He said Collins may have started her career decades ago in Washington with good intentions, but she has become just as spineless and corrupt as the establishment she now serves. Kevin mentioned Roe versus Wade. He talked about that she got elected saying that she would protect Roe versus Wade, only she turned around to support a Supreme Court justice that voted to overturn it. And then she talked about her privilege. He talked about using her privilege and power to funnel $60 million in federal contracts to her lobbyist husband. These were very specific attacks we heard.
Yeah, and Kevin and I were both at Plattner Rally in Bar Harbor on Friday, and he used a version of that line about her husband, former defense contractor, and then added, you don't see many articles about that. And that is part of the theme that he is working on. Maybe it's out of necessity because of all the negative attention he's gotten, but there is resonance to what he's saying in Maine. Any reporter who's been there, reporters probably want to spend as much of the summer as possible in Maine. You do hear feedback, even after a bad news cycle for Plattner, that this is a lot of discourse in D.C., a lot of factional folks in the Democratic Party who don't want to succeed. You see like Josh Gottheimer, Jake Auchincloss, people who do not like the progressive wing of the party, jumping on every mistake he has made in his past. His argument being, I'm like a lot of people who are not groomed for power and are not of D.C., and D.C. doesn't like, and I'm going to shake it up. Now, that wasn't the argument before these stories broke. It was but that was always a seed of it. I'm not a local mayor. I've not run for office before. I don't have, even when Republicans attacked his prep school experience, he didn't finish that prep school. He had a scholarship and didn't finish it. It is that he pulled himself up after making a bunch of mistakes. Now, the number of mistakes is multiplied, but you do hear that when you're in Maine, that there's a little bit of fatigue that D.C. keeps talking about these stories that a lot of people have processed.
Sam, that is a very important point here. And, I mean, a lot of people were predicting what this matchup was going to be. But as I always say, the voters have the final say, and the voters have told us. So now we've got a Collins-Plattner matchup for November, and it is actually shaping up to be very, very expensive. Both of these candidates are fundraising very well. I think Republicans see this as a seat that's important to them for holding the Senate. Democrats obviously see this as a seat that's important to them. What do you make of the money we are about to see in Maine?
Well, it's going to be extraordinary. I mean, a lot of these Senate marquee contests are going to be extraordinary in terms of the money. It is an obviously critical seat, right? I mean, this is heading into the cycle, the seat the Democrats thought was most likely to tip for them. And yet, ironically, they couldn't get anyone to run for it for a while, and then that's why Graham Plattner became the candidate. On the flip side, obviously, Susan Collins is probably the most endangered Republican incumbent in the country, and you'll note that Donald Trump has taken a very sort of hands-off approach. He doesn't criticize her in the way he criticizes other people who vote against him on occasion. And the administration has been very tactical in making sure that while they're cutting spending everywhere else, Maine continues to bring home a lot of appropriations. There's a reason for that. So to answer your question, it's highly critical for each party. Each party is prioritizing it. The question I'm going to have in the next week or couple months is, what do the Democratic Party apparatuses do with this, right? Like, so not just the DSCC, but the super PAC that supports the Democratic Senate candidates, any of the independent expenditure groups, are they going to invest in this race? Logically, they should, right? I mean, it is a tipping point race potentially, but obviously Plattner's become a bit more radioactive. Maybe that dissuades them. And then secondarily is, will Plattner see a surge in grassroots giving? Usually that's what happens when you play the sort of talking points that he's played in the last couple of days, which is he's a victim of the establishment and that people need to rally around him. I think he used the word a movement tonight in his acceptance speech. I know he raised about $200,000 or so after the New York Times story. I am curious to see if that surge continues and grows, because that could help him really flip what is ostensibly a pretty small state when it comes to the actual number of voters.
It's such an important point. You know, Kevin, we talk a lot about how voters feel about Graham Plattner, but I also think it's important to ask how the voters are feeling about Susan Collins, okay? Because in a potential matchup against Plattner, the question is she getting a boost from all the reporting about him? I've talked to some people in Maine, and I don't know if that's the case, but you're on the ground, you tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I believe the most publicly she's weighed in on this whole thing is to call the comments troubling. Now, we will see if they continue to develop that line of attack. It almost certainly seems primed and ready to go. And as I was talking to actually some Republican Collins supporters today, they were, expressing moral outrage about some of the accusations against Plattner. But then when I turned to them and said, okay, but did you vote for Trump? And the response was, well, yes. And I was like, well, how do you square the various scandals that have plagued Trump over the years? And they're like, well, those were all media lies. So, I mean, that's kind of what's going on that side of the aisle. When it comes to Collins supporters or folks that have backed Collins, I mean, look, we've talked to folks that are either going to vote for Plattner or at least don't want to vote for Collins, who have voted for Collins in the past. And part of it is they see as kind of this Trump 2.0 era. They see Collins as not necessarily being as moderate as she once was, particularly in light of the Roe ruling, the Roe overturning of Roe. And so if Plattner is able to build off of that, perhaps there's some movement that they can try to pry off some of the past Collins support. But keep in mind, as has been said once or twice this evening, we have seen, of course, Collins below in the polling in past elections, and she has pulled it off. And folks here are aware that she is going to be a hard person to beat.
Yeah, this will not be a cakewalk. I have one more on this race in Maine, if you will, Sam. You know, there are a lot of Democrats who backed Plattner that have continued to stand by him, like one of my former bosses, Senator Sanders, Representative Ro Khanna, right? I'm wondering what your take is on all of this, because in previous cycles, and I would argue not even previous cycles, right? Just a couple weeks ago, we saw Eric Swalwell, because of a lot of allegations and the hubbub around what was being said about him in the press, he was tapped on the shoulder by some leaders in the Democratic Party and saying, hey, I think it's time for you to get out of this race in California and focus on fighting this. That didn't happen in this race for a number of different reasons, but do you think Democrats have now made a calculation about winning is more important than just being right?
Well, there's a few things to probably unpack here. One is that there's distinctions between these situations. Not every case is the same, right? For instance, the Swalwell case presented a lot more serious accusations. Then again, the Franken case, he was forced out, didn't seem to rise to the level of Graham Plattner. But who am I to judge sort of the moral clarity of each case? And I think that's what's happening here with the voters, which is you have an appetite among the Democratic electorate to just say, you know what? Republicans are still apologizing for Donald Trump or saying it's fake news. Republicans are rallying around Ken Paxton, who has a myriad scandals. Why do we need to be precious about this stuff? Why do we need to fold among the pressure? Why do we need to be more of the moral scold party? We should just stick with our guy. Now, I will also say there's probably some, simple calculus happening here too, which is that when Swalwell left the primary for governor of California, there's plenty of fallback options that Democrats could turn to, right? When Franken was forced out of the Senate seat in Minnesota, it was a Democratic governor who was going to make the replacement. In this case, yeah, Plattner could have been pushed out and perhaps Janet Mills would have come in, but that comes with some serious complications. There's a number of people that Plattner has brought into the process politically who are Bernie supporters maybe, or who haven't been supporters at all, who would have turned to that in that scenario and said, oh my God, the establishment Democratic Party is once again putting its thumb on the scale to help a establishment Democratic candidate get a nominee that they didn't deserve. And that would have turned off a lot of voters in Maine and elsewhere. And that's a risk that the party probably couldn't have taken in that moment.
You are going to have the last word on this piece, Dave. I think Sam makes a very interesting point, and I remember very vividly from 2015, 2016, those accusations of the party putting their finger on the scale. Here's the thing I think people forgot. This was not a situation where there was already a Democratic nominee and then the party apparatus would have had to make a decision. The voters had not had the opportunity to weigh in. What do you think tonight, across the board, in Maine and South Carolina, and we're still looking at numbers coming in Nevada, for example, what does that tell us or caution us about this upcoming November?
Well, in speaking of 2016, I was thinking about being in the Post newsroom when the Access Hollywood story broke, David Farenthold's story, and I think he went to the DNC's headquarters that minute. People would have been updating their spreadsheets about what job they were going to get in the Clinton administration. So one thing is voters are I wouldn't say they have short memories, but they can process something and make a new judgment after a couple months. It's Republicans' job to make these scandals last and last and last. And we're talking about the themes we're seeing in these primaries. We are seeing Trump endorse candidates who are loyal to him. There's two kinds of Trump endorsements. There are people who have done great favors for him in the past, like Ken Paxton, and there are people who beg him for the endorsement and get it. And that's the Randy Feenstra story. That's the story of these Republicans who didn't get it in South Carolina. It's the story of Pamela Avett, who's ahead in the polls. A theme has been Republican members of Congress running for higher office are not doing that well. And the Republican goal, if you back up further, is let's make this election a choice between not a referendum, not do you want Trump to have 2 more years of power or not. Make it a choice. Democrats are crazy, and you know what we're doing. We're trying our best. And Republicans who've been trying to make that argument in states and running on the tax cut, running on refunds, not that popular. Not the voters who are rejecting it. They're not enthralled with people in Washington. That runs through everything. This is going to be maybe the 3rd, 4th election in a row where if you can make the case that you are anti-DC and DC hates you and the establishment wants you to lose, you start ahead.
Well, there you go. I mean, the voters are experiencing a lot of things. They have a lot of feelings, and they're very clear about what they think. This is going to be an interesting midterm election. Dave, Kevin, Sam, thank you all very, very much. Coming up later in the show, a day before the cage match on the White House lawn, a Trump-backed super PAC is raising money to inject into key races this November. And the cost for a ticket? $1 million, folks. But first up, after the break, Trump retaliates after blaming Iran for downing an Army helicopter. What it means for your wallet as oil stock prices sink to their lowest levels in decades. The 11th hour just getting underway on a Tuesday night. Time now for my favorite segment, Money, Power, Politics. U.S. Central Command said tonight that it launched self-defense strikes against Iran, following through on the president's promise to respond to Iran's downing of a U.S. Army Apache helicopter. That vow to retaliate came shortly after Energy Secretary Chris Wright claimed traffic in the Strait of Hormuz was, quote, rising meaningfully. Of course, that does not mean traffic is anywhere near normal levels. Just so to set the baseline for you, new data from the IMF shows a 7-day moving average of just 5 ship arrivals as of Sunday. That is down from more than 100 before the U.S. and Israel struck Iran in February. All of this comes less than a week after oil executives warned the White House energy prices could surge within weeks if Hormuz traffic does not return to normal. And oil inventories, the U.S. Energy Information Administration said today, well, they are approaching multi-decade lows. Joining me now is Max Chafkin, Bloomberg business journalist and host of Bloomberg's Everybody's Business podcast, and veteran Washington correspondent John Harwood. He's a distinguished fellow at Duke University and columnist for Zetail on Substack. John, I want to start with these warnings about oil inventories and potential price spikes. I get gas, okay, like everybody else in America. I filled up my tank just this past weekend. Part of me didn't fill it up. I put $85 in, and it didn't even get me to full. So how significant is this news, and what does it mean for everyday Americans, not the markets?
Well, it's very significant because we know that even if the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz ended tomorrow, it's going to take a lot of time to replenish the oil shipments that have been held up. And one of the things that has helped constrain oil prices has been countries using stocks of oil that they had. And those stocks are now running low. So we're going to have effects of this for a long time to come, and it can't provide any comfort for American consumers to see that amid all this talk of we're going to have a ceasefire within a few days, and Donald Trump always seems to be on the verge of getting out of this fiasco that he's in, that an Iranian drone was able to shoot down an Apache helicopter, and the United States had to respond, and all of that just suggests a drawn-out quagmire that is causing the administration to take on water politically.
Max, I asked John about the effect on the American people because I believe two things can be true at the same time, right? We've got these oil inventories hitting new lows, potential price spikes. John talks about the effect on the American consumers. But even with these recent declines, right, the markets have stayed largely positive, okay? So all of these things are happening at the same time. There's the markets over here and what's happening for the American people over here. Is this a sign that something is broken, or is this just how it is?
I mean, there are lots of stuff with the stock market that will make you feel that way. I mean, it is not a measure of the health of the U.S. economy. It is not a measure of how things are going for U.S. consumers. It's related to the health and profits of large companies by and large. And you do have a real gap right now where you've seen these massive gains in the stock market, largely around AI. It's a bunch of big American technology companies, by and large, driving this gain, and that is pretty divorced from the sort of everyday American reality. I mean, there is some hope, and you have the industry, the tech industry, as well as some politicians, sort of suggesting that this is going to ultimately, make us all richer. But of course, we haven't seen that yet.
I'm waiting. I'm looking for it, but maybe tomorrow. New topic, Max. SpaceX is barreling toward an absolutely massive IPO. But Yahoo Finance reminds us that there are some lessons to be learned from past public offerings, like Facebook, for example. What do you think?
Well, this is definitely worth paying attention to if you care about your sort of investment portfolio, because, unlike past IPOs, initial public offerings, this one is really being marketed squarely at retail investors, at regular people with Schwab accounts and Fidelity accounts and so on. We've seen banks, the banks that are promoting this, marketing very aggressively to retail investors, essentially trying to get them into this IPO. The argument being that if you're able to get into the IPO on day one, that you get, what's known as a pop, and that's good. But in general, over the next year or so, those IPOs have not performed very well, and we've seen a lot of high-profile IPOs kind of fall off in the months that follow, basically as insiders sell off, and that's exactly what's going to happen with SpaceX. You have a bunch of early employees, investors who are about to become billionaires. They are going to sell their stock to the public, and there's a possibility, if the stock doesn't move in the right direction, that investors end up holding the bag.
The investors will end up holding the bag that's given regular Americans, and it's concerning. John, the SBA administrator, Kelly Loeffler, said today that AI is going to fuel job creation among everyday Americans, which is very interesting given how even Silicon Valley has warned of a potential AI job apocalypse. You were here with me on Friday where we talked extensively about AI. It's not popular with the young people. So what do you make of what the SBA administrator is saying today?
Well, I think young people are fearful of the effect on the job market, but the reality is we don't really know. We don't know to what extent AI is going to complement the work that people do and raise productivity and allow more jobs to be created, or whether it's going to displace a lot of white-collar work, pink-collar work. And so, the administration doesn't have a ton of credibility, but of course they're going to be talking this up. It is, as Max just indicated, fueling the rise in the markets. The administration, by the way, has done a pretty good job of manipulating the markets with respect to the war and, managing convenient releases about the end of the war to prevent, to get the stock market from falling. But AI is really the driver, and it's a big unknown. Some of these AI companies are not going to be profitable for a while. They may be exceptionally profitable in the long run, but getting from the short run to the long run can be quite a distance.
Max, when we talk about the politics of AI, there's how young people are feeling, right? It's this anxiety, entry-level jobs. But then there's also this piece about people around the country fighting back against data centers in their own communities, in red states and blue states alike. I think that it's going to be an issue in the midterms and beyond, but what say you?
Yeah, absolutely think it's an issue. And I think it's part of why you're seeing the Trump administration make comments like this. You're also seeing, big AI companies and investors and operating executives at these companies pouring huge sums of money into politics right now, aimed at trying to move policy towards data centers, away from AI regulation, and so on. And I think these two things are absolutely linked. I mean, the data center issue is partly about electricity prices, it's partly about the environment, but I think it's also about just a general, economic angst. It's a feeling that there are these AI companies that are controlled by a very small number of people. You look at the SpaceX IPO, it's an AI IPO by and large. Elon Musk has 85% of the voting shares. So these are a handful of people controlling a lot of wealth and power.
Max, John, thank you very much. We'll continue to talk about this, folks. But when we come back, UFC fighters will enter the octagon built on the White House South Lawn, but the entire press corps won't even be able to get through the gates. Why Trump's birthday event is closed to most reporters unless the UFC allows it. This Sunday, we will see mixed martial arts fighters brutalize each other on the South Lawn of the White House, the same day as Trump's 80th birthday. This is an aerial shot of the octagon, folks. But the night before, a Trump-aligned super PAC is going to host a $1 million per person fundraiser. That's according to 3 people familiar. Now, the fundraiser will happen at Trump National Golf Club in Virginia, and the money goes to MAGA Inc., a Trump-linked super PAC. Joining me now is Eugene Daniels. He's MS Now's senior Washington reporter and co-host of The Weekend. He's also co-host of a very great podcast called Clock It with Simone and Eugene. Yes. I think I know them. Let's start with the fundraiser, Eugene. One of the people familiar with the fundraiser insists that the fundraiser is completely independent from the UFC fight, even though it's being reported that some rich donors are attending both. I don't know if I'm buying that. It feels like the UFC fight is being used as a bolster, as a hook to get people in town, but also take this fundraiser on. It's legal, but it's murky.
And I think a lot of normal people out in America would have some questions about it. Because would the fundraiser be happening if the president of the United States wasn't having a birthday party where these guys were going to be beating each other up on the lawn of the White House? And the answer is probably no, right? And so that's the question about them being connected. And the reason that it matters is because the White House is the people's house. We've already seen how President Trump has treated it. We've already seen him knock down the entire East Wing. We see him talking about his ballroom over and over again. Now he's having a party for himself, basically, his 80th birthday, this kind of monstrosity that we saw as we were going somewhere
We literally
today.
saw it.
Yeah.
We were driving down Pennsylvania Avenue this evening, and it was my first time seeing it in the evening lit up like that. And I was very struck by it because the way we were driving was the same route I used to take when I would go to the White House for work. That is the entrance that I would drive into. And to just see the octagon lit up is like, this is the White House, and the party tacked onto it. I guess we could thank Citizens United for all of this.
Look, and yes. And also part of this is when people hear $1 million per person per plate, however you want to put it, while they are struggling to put gas in their car, while they're struggling to put food on the table, the questions that they have is anyone focused on me? And I think that's something that this entire midterm that I've been hearing from Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Is Donald Trump focused on me as a voter? And for Republicans, is he focused on us as people who want to keep the House and the Senate? And the answer continues to seem like it's no.
They're very focused on this UFC fight. You, among other things, served as the president of the White House Correspondents Association. The Washington Post reports that the White House press corps will not be allowed on White House grounds on Sunday because of the UFC fight unless the UFC gives them credentials. Only the press pool will be allowed in. I I have never heard of, when I worked at the White House at least, I could not imagine turning over access to a White House event to an outside entity to decide who can come in and come out to cover it. What's your reaction to this?
Well, that's because you respected the process. You respected that
Sometimes
the
I
freedom.
didn't agree with
you
y'all.
didn't agree. We
Okay.
fought a lot.
Yeah, we had a lot of tussles.
But at the same time, you respected the reasons that we were there, right? I think that's the difference. Donald Trump and his team seem completely okay with an outside entity operating who gets to come to the White House, which is quite strange. I think there are a lot of reporters who are confused. And the reason that it matters for everyday people, if something happens, right? The White House Correspondents' Dinner a couple months ago is a perfect example. If something happens and reporters aren't in the room and it happens around the president, how are people supposed to know, right? It is not just we're nosy, we want to know. It is a matter of national concern. And so when you have just a select few, right, the pool is a smaller group than usual. And usually White House reporters are able to sit in their when there's events at the White House, even if they're not at the event, they can sit in their seats and they can watch it on YouTube and they're paying attention. And that's not, it seems like that's not going to be the case. They're not even going to be allowed on.
You know, reporters, specifically those who cover the White House, as it's often said, they are writing the first draft of history. I want to take a turn because we talk a lot about what matters for the American people. Social Security matters a lot for the American people. And we just learned that Social Security is going to run out sooner than expected. It's now going to happen in late 2032. And that's according to the program's trustees. They say two of the biggest reasons are, one, declining immigration, and two, Trump's tax law. This is going to affect a whole lot of people, including Trump voters. I'm thinking of all the seasoned folk that rely on their Social Security checks.
Yeah, and I think this is something that's really important. When Donald Trump gets into office, people anticipate that he's going to do something for them, whether they voted for him or not, right? And the folks that did vote for him have a lot of questions about these kinds of things. One, Donald Trump doesn't seem to care that much about Social Security. The one thing he promised was that they weren't going to touch it. Sure, but then it seems like he's made it worse. And I think one of the first rules of politics is, do no harm. And what we've seen over and over again, the choices that he made, this tax law where a lot of wealthier people are going to benefit more than people who have less money, right? People that are less well off, that's an issue. And the fact that Donald Trump and Stephen Miller, Deputy White House Chief of Staff who deals with immigration, and Kristi Noem and now Markwayne Mullin, the Secretary of DHS, have been so focused on mass deportation, they're not thinking about the fact that immigrants are also the lifeblood of the economy in many ways.
They pay taxes. Immigrants pay taxes.
Even though they don't benefit from Social Security often. And so this is one of the things that when you talk to immigration advocates is they will tell you is that people that just want to get rid of all the immigrants outside of the moral issues that they have with it, it's also the financial and the economic impacts that happen.
In a normal world, this would be the defining problem of the midterms. But here we are. Eugene, thank you so much. And for you at home, you're going to get more of Eugene tomorrow night. He'll be hosting the midweek nightcap. I'll be watching at home. We'll see you then. But tonight, still to come, we are taking you to Nevada, where Democrats have their eye on the governor's seat. Our friend John Ralston joins us after the break. One of the crucial swing states, Nevada, held its primaries today, and Democrats have a big opportunity there to take over the governor's mansion. Incumbent Republican Governor Joe Lombardo is seen as particularly vulnerable, and today Democrats in Nevada got to pick their challenger, and just in the last few minutes, that race was called. State Attorney General Aaron Ford is projected to win. With me now, John Ralston, CEO of the Nevada Independent and an MS Now political analyst. John, before we get to any specific races, what are you hearing from the people of Nevada right now? What issues are they focused on? And obviously, we just had that race call for the Democratic candidate for governor now, Aaron Ford, who currently serves as the Attorney General.
Well, I think, Simone, that the issues in Nevada are not that different than they are elsewhere. Economic concerns are a big deal here. In fact, the governor is even thinking of calling a special session to declare a tax holiday, which may happen within the next couple of weeks. And Aaron Ford, the Attorney General, is very well aware of those economic concerns and is already using those, as are the Democrats in general, in that race to attack Lombardo, holding him responsible for economic woes. The economy here is not in the tank, but it's not doing that well.
So the I think what is very interesting is that the affordability issues that are confronting people all across the country, it's happening there in Nevada too. You've also got the hospitality economy, which frankly, post-COVID, all across this country has not really recovered. You layer in the economic concerns on top of that. The tourism is up, it's a little down, it's a little up. All of these things came to a head, not just in the Democratic primary, but it will be a factor in this general election. What's your reaction to the results in the Democratic primary thus far?
Well, I have to say that Attorney General Ford was expected to win, but I think the Republicans have to be disappointed with how much he crushed that victory. I think they were hoping that Alexis Hill, who was a fairly prominent elected official in Washoe County, which for your viewers is where Reno is, would put more of a dent in Ford. So he's going to be able to say that, he beat her 3-1 or so in that race, and that's a good result for him. The general election, though, is a different story.
John, people often talk about, we always say Nevada is a swing state. It is. I've been following you and talking to you for a very long time in my little young political career. But I think folks forget that in 2024, when Trump won the state of Nevada, it was the first time that a Republican presidential candidate had won the state in about 20 years. I think Bush was the last Republican candidate to win it. So presidential candidate to win. So it is a state, both of the senators are Democrats right now, right? But this governor's race, that is the money this fall. Just how vulnerable is the Republican governor right now? Did he do anything specific, or is he just, a casualty of the national environment?
It's a very good question. So Joe Lombardo defeated Steve Sisolak, who was the incumbent Democratic governor, only one to lose in 2022. And he only did it by 15,000 votes out of 1 million cast, so a point and a half. So we're a purple state, and we're going to be a purple state for some time, as you mentioned. Trump won the state in 2024, which surprised me and many others, but I think what was missed, and a lot of analysts missed, mostly the Hispanic vote, which is huge here, as you know, can be about 20% of the electorate, started moving towards the Republicans. That has reversed here, as it has reversed in many other states. I think that Joe Lombardo is not as worried about that, or worried about the economy, or even worried about Aaron Ford as much as he's worried about Donald Trump and Trump's numbers and the economic carnage that they're going to hold Trump and Lombardo responsible for. The Democrats are already calling it the Trump-Lombardo economy. And so they're worried about that. They think that Ford has a lot of baggage, that they're going to use out-of-state travel against him, which will be a significant issue. And Lombardo has all the money in the world, and he'll far outspend Ford in this race. But this is a real race. It's within 5 points or so. And I think just the fact that you're talking to me about it shows it's going to be a nationally watched race, right?
We are watching it. John, this will not be our last time chatting. Thank you very much for your time tonight. I'm Simone Sanders Townsend, in for Stephanie Ruhle. We'll be right back with more election coverage right after this.